Okie dokie, I believe we are all the way live. Hello and welcome to my graveyard. I am your host of the evening, the Cemetery Man from Salem, Mass. Always taking names of kicking candy ass, live and in living color here with you on Grande's Graveyard. And tonight we welcome a diehard George A. Romero fan, a Romero historian, and a true good brother who I met in Pittsburgh, PA at this past year's Living Dead weekend. I'm talking about the one, the only, the Alpha Romero. Welcome, my friend. How are you tonight?
What's going on, man? What's going on, everybody in the chat? And real quick, I gotta ask, because I'm very, as somebody who does this too, how long did it take you, and how often do you practice that opening?
With the rhyming
it's
part,
always like you never miss a beat. It's fucking impressive.
The rhyming part that's like standard. That's like in my brain scripted. But then the one, the only Alpha off the cuff, completely off the cuff, and I nailed it. I screwed it up once or twice. I did it in Spanish once. That was something else. If you remind me later, I'll send it to you in Spanish. It was very funny and entertaining. But Alpha Man, I'm so happy to have you on the show tonight. Of course, I found your channel right before the Living Dead weekend this past year, and of course that was a dream vacation for me. I met Scott Reiniger, Ken Forey, so many, John Amplis and Mike Gornick, so many wonderful, nice people. And of course I ran into you right towards the end before I was going out to go to the Mets game, and I was like, man, I gotta get Alpha on the show to do something, because I know you're in your channel, you do all these like Romero centered shows, and I was like, I'd love to do a Romero centered show with you. And that's why we came up with this idea here tonight, where it's Romero in the 90s, which is the very under talked about era in his career, and there's a lot of stuff that not even I knew about until this week, thanks to you. So I have to thank you for that. And I just wanted to say thank you so much for making the time and coming on. I do have a getting to know you question for you, so I'm gonna hit you with that right here before we get to the chat. Getting to know you question. All right, this is a tough one. Any two Romero actors or contributors that are no longer with us or you have not met, you could pick any two, and you go out to dinner with them. Where are you going? Who are you going with? What are you talking about? Hopefully Romero.
That's a really good question. Holy shit.
They can be alive. It's just you can't have met them. If you've met them, they don't qualify.
The one that comes to mind right off the bat is Richard Rubenstein.
Ooh.
I think that dude is fascinating because he's so he's just hidden away. He doesn't do a lot of documentaries or bonus features on stuff or anything like that. He's just kind of, and everybody hates him apparently.
Yeah.
Nobody likes him.
Nobody.
But I'd love to just sit down at a dinner with him and just have a conversation, talk about, his relationship with George, because let's be honest, George's career probably was close to being over until Richard Rubenstein came into the picture and kind of was the financial, visionary, the business-minded portion of George's career, because George was pretty much bankrupt by the time the Crazies had come out. I love the Crazies, but at the time, it was just poorly, low budget, poorly distributed. And George was in a lot of financial trouble, and then Richard Rubenstein came in and kind of guided his career towards some of the best, to me, the best work of his career: Martin, Dawn of the Dead, Night Riders, Creepshow. So I'd love to just talk to Richard Rubenstein just to kind of get an idea of what kind of guy he is. And then a second name, there's a lot. Fuck, man, that's a hard question.
It stinks because you just met Christine. I know you.
Yeah, that was one. That was definitely one. Maybe Dwayne Jones. I think that would be interesting, because Dwayne was always very, not that he disrespected or wasn't proud of the work that he did with Night of the Living Dead, but he was always more of a highbrow actor type guy, and I do recall a number of interviews and stuff that he had where he would refer to Night of the Living Dead as that silly monster movie he made back in the 60s. And he's just a really smart, just sweet guy. You never hear anything bad from anybody that worked with him on Night of the Living Dead. So that'd be one I'd love to meet and just kind of talk to and try to get inside his brain for a minute. But I'd say those two are probably the two.
If you had told me Richard Rubenstein would have been your first, I was like, wow. When you said that, that was like, let's start this show off hot. But Richard Rubenstein, wow, didn't see that coming. But the one thing you didn't say is where you guys going to eat, man.
Oh, I'd let him pick. He's a New Yorker like yourself. I'm sure he knows where he's a high-minded financial guru type guy. He knows where the good restaurants are.
As long as you make his ass pay, I'm cool with it.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, he's got that Dawn of the Dead money. Come on now.
Yeah, for real, he does. But let's get into the comments here. Terry was here before we went live. No school for me tomorrow, so I get to stay up for one night only on the graveyard. Right. Terry, welcome. I'll be on Psychobabble this Saturday. Looking forward to talking all things Psychobabble with you guys. Hayden Vavro, love the profile picture. That's the last movie we'll be talking about here tonight. I couldn't miss this one at all. The 1990s to the 2000s was truly one of the most fascinating years of George Romero's career. It's definitely, the most under talked about and interesting of all of them because it's just so screwed up. A lot of the stuff that happened to George here.
Yeah, and funny enough, he has said that was the most financially profitable time of his career. He made more money during that time period than he did in the rest of his career.
It's funny because it doesn't feel like he did anything, but at the same time, Night of the Living Dead, he didn't make his money off of that, and Martin was made for pennies, and Crazies was made for pennies and made pennies, and it just seemed like the guy was always kind of screwed over financially, with the exception of Creepshow. Mm-hmm. But yeah, that's the thing with Romero's career, and we'll get into that, is like how many times he's been screwed over, not just creatively, but financially, I think more so than any other of the big directors. Miss C is here, Ciao Grande and Alpha, waving hello to us. Hey, everyone in the chat. A lot of heartbreak for us horror fans, I recall, of course. Texas THC is in the house, 1965. Welcome, my friend. Hope all is well with you. James Abernathy's here all the way from the UK. Hey, Terry. Hey, everyone. Happy to have you here, James. He should really have made more films. If he directed Pet Sematary, I feel like Romero would have made more films. Well, that's going to be the first topic of the night, so I'm very excited you brought that up. Hello, everyone. We're just scrolling down here. Wow, I skipped a ton of comments. I'm sorry. Let's see. People saying hi. I'm going to skip over the ones people saying hi to each other. Hey, Grande and Alpha. Ciao, Grande and Alpha Romero. Are we talking Romero tonight? Hi to the chat. Hell yeah, we're talking Romero tonight. All things
Caesar Romero.
Caesar Romero. Of course we are. I am the Ice Lord. Hey there, Grande. Wes, welcome, my friend. I'll see you Saturday night, possibly tomorrow night, as Wes does another episode of the Ninth Circle of Hell. You guys don't want to miss that. Hey, Wes and everyone in the chat. Only on the graveyard. Sean Blue Digital's in the house. What's going on, good brother? Hope all is well. Terry says Stephen King and Dario Argento would be mine. Well, that's, again, two names we'll be discussing right off the bat tonight. So everyone's saying hello. Mernzy's here. Hey, Mernzy. Hey, Graveyardians. What's up, Grande and Alpha? This is going to be awesome. Also is going to be awesome. Mernzy will be on next week to talk all things his top 5 David Lynch. Super excited for that. And I think we got one more here. Sup, fam? Night of the Living Dead remake is a personal favorite of mine. I would agree with that, and I'm very excited to get into that. So I made a little bit of a list here in the private chat that only I and Alpha can see. And I guess we kicked things off in the latter half of the 1980s, around 1988, 1989. And George, of course, was wrapping Monkey Shines in 87, and they called him to do reshoots of the ending in 1988. And thus he misses out on directing Pet Sematary because of this. And I guess we'll turn right to you, Alpha. What are your thoughts on that? Does that one thing and decision from that studio cost Romero a very different decade of the 1990s that we're going to discuss tonight if he directs Pet Sematary? What do you think about that?
I mean, obviously, yeah. I mean, I think it changes a lot. I mean, Pet Sematary was... Mary Herron, I think, ended up directing.
Mary Lambert.
Who the fuck is Mary Herron?
Mary Herron is American Psycho. She directed.
Okay, there you go. Okay.
You got your Mary directors.
The horror Mary directors, yeah. But she did a great job with that. I really liked Pet Sematary. But, I think with George at the time, I mean, it definitely would have changed the trajectory of his career going into the 90s. We would be having a completely different conversation tonight if he had done Pet Sematary. I mean, it was a huge hit at the time. It's unfortunate that he didn't get to because of studio bullshit. Because it's just one of those things where they send the movie to a screening and the fans, teenage or something, and want teenagers to give notes on what they could do better, that type of shit. And I don't know. It's unfortunate that he missed out on Pet Sematary, but I mean, who knows? Who can say where his career? But to me, like, I think the turning point in his career was another Stephen King project, was Creepshow, because Creepshow came about. He did Creepshow in '82 with Stephen King, and I think after that point, he kind of really got pigeonholed as a horror director. He couldn't get any other work outside of that. Like, I knew he wanted to do originally after Night Riders, which is not a horror film, but I know originally after Night Riders, and Night Riders was kind of a disappointment. So maybe he kind of went back to his horror roots and was really open to doing that. But I know he wanted to do a movie called Shooby Dooby Moon at one point after Night Riders, which is like a musical sci-fi thing. I don't know. There's not a lot of information on it, but yeah, I think that definitely changed the trajectory of his career. And I don't know, who's to say, like, if he did end up doing Pet Sematary, what could have been.
It's funny because, like, in a parallel world, I would like to have seen George Romero's Pet Sematary just to see it. But I agree with you at the same time. Mary Lambert did a wonderful job, and at the same time, to even just think, it's not like Mary Lambert got a lot of work from that either. But at the same time, right. Mary Lambert's Mary Lambert, George Romero's George Romero. I mean, George Romero had made classic horror movies and classic movies overall. I would consider Night Riders like a underground classic. It's like his most personal film, and like, I think that it would have been interesting, and I would have loved to see that movie in a parallel world. But at the same time, it's not like Mary Lambert makes that movie and then becomes the biggest horror director of the '90s. I think horror in general really wasn't happening in the 1990s until you get to around 96. And then, after that, then it really kind of gained heat and turned on again. But I don't know. I would like to see it. And the thing is, I always think the ending of Monkey Shines, I don't care for what they went back and reshot. Like, I don't like,
no,
it wasn't
George didn't like it either.
Yeah, it just wasn't, I don't think it was worth it. And I think it actually kind of hurts that film. I think that film is very good until that finale. I'm like, always like kind of scoff at that finale. And then to hear that he missed out on Pet Sematary because of that, and just because of bad test screenings, it's just so odd to me that would happen. But I mean, it is unfortunate. And I don't know, I personally would have liked to have seen Romero direct a Pet Sematary, and I do think it would have possibly changed his entire career in the decade to come. But instead, we have what we have. And in this universe, not a parallel universe, but
yeah. Well, you made a really good point to the fact that horror did, even if he had done Pet Sematary, I mean, the horror genre was kind of on the downturn at that point anyway, until, Scream, I guess, in '96. But, so yeah.
Yeah, if you look at Carpenter. After They Live, does Carpenter do anything really of note in the 1990s? No. Like, look at Tobe Hooper. Does Tobe Hooper do anything as good as he was doing in the 70s and the early half of the 80s? As good in the, like, it seemed like the entire, no matter who you were, unless you were an up and comer like a Peter Jackson, who was just burst onto the scene in the early 90s with Bad Taste and Dead Alive and Meet the Feebles and movies like that. If you weren't that type of upcoming filmmaker, it just wasn't happening. It just really wasn't. So, I mean, it is what it is. Sean Blues Digital gives you a compliment. Alpha Romero is the best avatar. I would have to say that is an awesome avatar too. Let's see. Question for Alpha. What movies are the posters behind him if he likes to share, of course? Oh, go ahead. Share.
It's all Romero. I got 2 Dawn posters, Night of the Living Dead, Crazies, Day of the Dead, Night Riders, and I have my original green letter Dawn of the Dead 1 sheet over here, autographed by a bunch of fucking people. I got a Martin poster over here. I have a Coven poster signed by Mark Borchardt over here.
What?
Yeah.
That was a curveball. I never thought you were going to say that.
Oh, I love that. That may be one of my top 5 favorite movies of all time. I love it. Yeah, I got a bunch of shit in here.
That's fantastic.
Land of the Dead poster over here. This is the weird, like, random Land of the Dead poster that has like the 2 reviews or whatever on top, and I'd never seen it. The opening night that I went to see Land of the Dead in 2005, I was 16. I just got my license, just got a car, got my first job. I was probably got my first paycheck, went on a first date with soon to be girlfriend at the time, and I took her to see Land of the Dead because I'd been waiting for it for like a decade.
I love it.
And I remember that was the poster on the outside of the theater that we went to see it. And I was like, that is a weird looking poster. I didn't expect that. And I never saw it again until like maybe a year or so ago. I found it on eBay and I was like, holy shit, I got to buy that. So there's a story to that poster back there.
That is amazing. See, there's always I like that certain things can take you back to certain nights in your life like that. Like I know Terry, when I had Terry on, he actually told the story of when he went to see Land of the Dead opening night and he got knocked out in a bar. So it was like I'm just like, Jesus Christ, what is it about this Land of the Dead movie that all these people have these stories now? Slash for Francis, I love the hit song by the Ramones. Of course, so do I. I'm curious now too. And also Sean Blue says, "Go Birds, R.I.P. Vikings." Yeah, I'm pretty sure. Yeah, the Birds are going to go over the Vikings tonight. Hopefully, Jordan Addison can score me a touchdown. But that is neither here nor there. Let's move on, now into the 1990s, because that was the movie that cost him 1989 and, in my opinion, changed the whole trajectory. To start off, we've got two movies that he wrote screenplays for. He would not direct. And to my knowledge, he wasn't on set for either of these movies. Of course, first he wrote the short story of the screenplay of Tales from the Dark Side of the Movie, the Cat from Hell segment. And he also would go on to write the remake of 1968's original film that he directed, of course, and put him on the map, of course, Night of the Living Dead 1990, which was directed by Savini. And, I really enjoyed both of these movies a lot more than the movie he ends up going on to direct this same year alongside Dario Argento. But tell me, man, what are your thoughts on these two movies? We don't have to go deep in depth review, but I'd love to hear your thoughts on these two movies.
So these two movies actually hold a special place for me because they were the first two Romero films I ever saw.
Oh.
If you want to put them in the Romero canon, like this was my introduction to George Romero. When I was like maybe 4 or 5 years old, my dad used to have a VHS tape with there were 3 movies on it. The first one, I watched this tape over and over and over and over again, and I was obsessed. First movie was Pretty Woman. The second movie was Total Recall. Nice. And the third movie was Tales from the Dark Side of the Movie.
What a trio.
Yeah, I mean, and all from 1990. My dad loved the fucking year. I grew up on every movie in the year 1990. I love it. So yeah, at the age of like 4 or 5 years old, I'm watching Tales from the Dark Side of the Movie on loop. Like I'm obsessed with this movie. I'm like, this is so cool. I've always been weird like that, I guess. And I actually got a chance to meet John Harrison at a Living Dead weekend a couple of years ago, and I walked up to him and I told him, I was like, I just want you to know that you're probably the reason that I'm here. And he's like, oh, really? You're a big fan of the Day of the Dead soundtrack or something? I'm like, no. Tales from the Dark Side of the Movie, that was the first horror movie I ever saw, and it stuck with me to this day. So, and he was just like, oh, I'm very sorry about that. I was like, no, trust me, it's all cool. But yeah, I love that. And Night of the Living Dead 1990 was the first zombie movie I think I ever saw. I mean, I was probably like 8, 9 years old, something like that. And so yeah, that kind of introduced me to the name George Romero. When I first saw the name George Romero, I just thought it was like this. I thought he was like this Edgar Allan Poe type character, which we transition here in a minute. But
yeah,
I just thought he was like this because there's something about it. George A. Romero just kind of felt like it was like Arthur Conan Doyle or something, some like old timey name or something. I don't know. So I just thought he wrote, this old story about zombies or something, and then they made the movie. But I never knew he was still alive at the time and still making movies and stuff.
Oh, so wow!
These are like my two, my introduction to horror and zombie films were these two movies, and I love them both. Night 90, I like less the older I get, the more I love. Because the first time I saw the original Night of the Living Dead, I didn't like it. Because I was like, well, this isn't Night 90, because I saw Night 90 first. So then, like, as I've grown and my love for the original Night has grown, it's harder to watch the remake and not compare it and be like, oh, they missed the point on this, or they missed this, or they could have done. And Tom, when you ask Tom about it, he kind of agrees. There was so much that he wanted to do, but he was a first-time director, struggling with the budget, time, and all that. He wanted to do so much more with it, but didn't get a chance to do it. So I think it's something. It's a film that he wishes he could go back and remake again, remake the remake, I guess. But
I'm glad you shared that. I am shocked to hear that because I got to be honest with you, man. And I think Savini did a great job with this. I mean, I've always been. I'm not a remake guy at all. There's a lot of remakes out there that people, I love Texas Chainsaw the remake. I'm like, dude, I can't even pretend.
And it's so bad now. It's so bad now. Like, I don't want to get into it because it'll be a whole thing, but I don't know how you feel about the Dawn of the Dead remake. But when if I'm out and just in day-to-day life and people see I have a Dawn of the Dead tattoo or I mention Dawn of the Dead, they automatically think of the 2004 remake. And I'm just like, no, there was a movie. Never mind. You're right. Yeah, it was a great movie. I love Sarah Polley. She's great. I just don't even argue with it anymore.
I'm that way with Texas. If people say like Texas Chainsaw, I'm always like, dude, you don't tell me you're talking about the Jessica Biel one.
Yeah.
That just automatically gets me. I don't really hate the Dawn remake at all. Actually, I hate the Day remake. That movie.
Yeah, those. I mean, that's not controversial at all. I mean, I'd be surprised if you liked them, but
yeah, I don't know. I really don't know a soul that likes the Day of the Dead remake. But this movie, I remember, like when I first watched this in particular, and I'll also get into my brief thoughts on the Tales from the Dark Side of the movie. This, I didn't have high expectations, and I ended up being blown away. And I think the number one thing that it does improve is the acting. I think, you have, of course, Tom Towles as the Cooper, the asshole Cooper. I think he did a great job. I always remember him from Henry, Portrait of a Serial Killer. You have, of course, horror royalty and Tony Todd, who would a couple years later go on to be the Candyman. And, just one of the greatest horror screen presences of all time is Tony Todd. And it's just so cool. I saw this on 35 millimeter just about a month ago in an all-night zombie-thon. And as soon as he came on the screen, people just started applauding. It's like, that's how important Tony Todd is to this community. That's how much we all love Tony Todd. Of course, you have Patricia Tallman as Barbara, who to me almost steals the movie, and she's the biggest improvement from one movie to the other, from the Barbara in the original to Judith O'Dea, who's weak and crying and helpless and all these things. Yeah, in this, Patricia Tallman kicking ass, taking names, and they're us, we're them, and they're us. I think she's great. She's arguably my favorite thing in this. And I thought Savini did a wonderful job. I thought this was going to be a special effects show. Mm-hmm. Oh, it's Savini. Okay. He's first-time director. He's just going to play at his strength and make it a gore fest. It's not really what this is. And anything, I think he played more to Romero in his screenplay. And I thought he did a really good job. In my opinion, if I had to do a top 10 remakes, this would be on there and towards the top. I always really liked this movie, and it definitely got an upgrade. I don't know if there's a 4K of this out, but I've had this DVD.
There's one coming. I know that there's one coming.
That's when I will have to pull the trigger because I know they had that Blu-ray had tons of like the Twilight Time Blu-ray that sold out, and it was too dark. Then the umbrella was too light. That's the Sony one, right?
Yes.
The Sony one apparently they finally got the transfer right because it was. Yeah, they did.
This was not bad.
Yeah, I've heard that transfer is good, and I will eventually dip. I'm hoping they someday do a 4K. I like the movie a lot. I think it's a damn good movie, and I thought Romero did a good job writing it. And then
I like it. I don't hate it.
No,
I don't hate it. It's just there are aspects to it. Like you like the transition, the way the Barbara character went in the 90s version, and I don't. Like I think that's it took the wrong turn, where I think Judith O'Dea's performance is more internalized. Like she's trying to cope with the idea that her brother is dead, the dead are coming back to life, and I think that's a really, because everybody in that movie's insane at one reason or another. They're trying to cope with this otherworldly, like something they couldn't fathom, and just for the Patty Tallman character to kind of just in the first night just be like, oh well, they're slow and we can just walk by them, and it's like, oh, it's like she's already coped and she's on, she's moving on, which is one way to do it, I guess. But I just prefer kind of the Barbara mental breakdown, her speech to Ben when she's like, Johnny asked for candy and we didn't have any candy, just like, and Ben's just like, this bitch will not stop, just keep calm, But no, overall it's a great remake, and Tom does a great job. I think Tom felt a little overwhelmed at the time because I think he was expecting George to be on set, a lot, But I think George was there for like the first day or so, and then he had to go and do. I think he was working on something. I can't remember what, but
I think it was Two Evil Eyes, because I felt, I always heard that story too, where Romero wanted to be there for Tom, but he couldn't be there for Tom because of his own, contractual obligations as a director elsewhere, and thus that's why Savini, first time director, I'm sure he had. I would have jitters too. I mean, we're all human, but I mean, for a first time, I would never know, and I thought. The thing is with Savini, he had directed some of the best Tales from the Dark Side episodes.
Mm-hmm.
And in vain, Tales from the Dark Side, the movie comes out the same year, and he's not involved in that as he is directing this. I thought he did such a good job in those episodes, whether it be the Halloween Candy or the Inside the Closet. I mean, people to this day talk about that. And then Family Reunion with Patricia Tallman as the lead. So it's so cool to see that kind of turn around a couple years later, and he directs Night 90. And I thought he did a wonderful job. I just didn't know that whole story where Savini, wishes he could have added more to it and stuff like that.
Yeah,
that's a shame. I didn't know that. I really didn't know that.
There's actually a book out. It's kind of hard to find, but he released a book with just like a bunch of the storyboards for the Night 90, for a lot of the stuff that he wanted to do for that film that he didn't get a chance to. So I think it's called like Night of the Living Dead 90, the version you've never seen. It's out there if you can find it. But yeah, he wanted to do a lot more with that movie than what he got to.
That is a shame. I never knew that. And then of course, Tales from the Dark Side, the movie. I've always been a big fan too. And I don't know. I didn't ask you this. Did you grow up with the show at all? Was it too like I know it aired? No, not at all. Hadn't any exposure to it?
No, I was a Tales from the Crypt kid. Like we watched that as when we were kids. So Tales from the Dark Side, to me, that it was the movie. That was all that I knew. It wasn't until years later that I realized that it was an actual show.
And did you like the show? Have you ever watched the show? Are you a fan or?
I've watched a few of episodes here and there, but I've never actually I actually have the entire season on DVD, but it looks so shitty. It's hard to watch sometimes.
It looks like shit. Yeah.
Yeah. It's pretty rough, but yeah, it's one that I haven't delved into as much as I should, because to me, like I said, the Tales from the Dark Side was always the movie. And then years later I discovered the show, and yeah, one of the first videos I tried to do on my channel was, I was going to go through episode by episode and do a watch along of Tales from the Dark Side, the show. So I may still do that. That may be a good idea.
In October, I'm going to do season 2, like rank all of season 2. I think you'd love it just because like Harrison was director of a few of them. Savini, Romero writes a couple of them. Richard Rubenstein, I think, produced all of them. Like it's all of those wonderful people that George had, in the community of Pittsburgh at the time. Yeah. It definitely has that feel. And it's just like one of those shows where I always was just a monster fan of it. And to see it come to the big screen, that's so cool and surreal. And I always liked the movie. I actually thought the last segment, with, oh my gosh, it was like the lovers. I forget the name of the
first Val.
Yeah, that I was.
Ray Chong and what's the dude's name? He's in like everything.
Yeah, I don't know. It slipped my mind. I know Christian Slater and Steve Buscemi are in the first one, and then the one Romero did has the old man from fucking Christmas Vacation. He's in it.
And David Johansen from the New York Dolls.
That's right. Yeah,
that's one reason I love that movie, even because I went through like a punk rock phase in high school. So in Tales from Dark Side, I'm just like, holy shit, it's Debbie Harry from Blondie. It's David Johansen from the New York Dolls. Like, there's so much to love about that movie. To me, I refer to it as Creepshow 3, the real Creepshow 3. Like that's what it should have been. Other than really that piece of shit that they ended up making, but.
Exactly. And it definitely, it was John Harrison again at the helm, and, Romero writing one of the scripts. It definitely, Michael McDowell also, who he had written, I think, the most episodes of the original series. And I thought he was just a wonderful writer, and he's been, gone for far too long. Rest in peace, Michael McDowell. I really like that anthology too. I think both of those movies are fantastic in comparison to what Romero actually ends up directing with another horror legend, which we're going to get into right now. But let's get back to comments. I've neglected y'all for far too long. Let's see. I guess that's one way of finding a possible soulmate. Take them on a horror movie date. Absolutely. That's really cool. Do you remember at all if she liked the movie, hated the movie?
She had pretty good taste, but I don't think she was too into it. I think she fed off me because I was a little disappointed by it. I was just like, this isn't. Well, when we get home, I'll take it. We'll pop in Dawn of the Dead or something. I was a little disappointed when I first saw Land of the Dead. I've grown to like it more and more, but yeah, she was okay with it. She liked the older ones a little more, I think. But
I'm the same way. I was always a little bit disappointed by Land of the Dead myself. So you're not alone there. Definitely Miss C. It's almost a proposal. Absolutely. Will you see Land of the Dead with me? Tales from the Dark Side of the movie feels like a cross between 1001 Arabian Nights and Hansel and Gretel. Welcome, Slasher Fred. Hope all is well with you. Creepshow 2, Tales from the Dark Side of the movie, Night of the Living Dead 90 proved that Romero was truly a fantastic writer. I love the changes Romero did with the Night remake. I would agree with that, but interesting to hear the other side of that coin where of course Alpha said that he wasn't a big fan of what they did with the Barbara character. To me, that's the big change where it's like, okay, they went this direction with her, but it's interesting to hear the other side of the coin. I've actually appreciate hearing that. There was a horror movie in the 80s called Pulse that Matthew Lawrence was in. That's right. That's an awesome with the electricity. I really enjoy that movie. Anthony Chobot's got 929 subs. Congratulations, my friend. I enjoyed the Dawn of the Dead remake, but it does not hold a candle to the. I would agree with that. It's not as good as the original, but it's like I don't. In a world of bad remakes, I don't look at that one and just go, oh, But I definitely gonna. I mean, Alpha and I, our favorite movie is Dawn of the Dead, so I could totally see why Alpha wouldn't like it. I don't mind the movie though. I never did.
The fact that they made a Dawn of the Dead movie and the end credits was Disturbed, Down with the Sickness. I was just like, this is so goddamn corny. I got to get out of here.
And the slow down, get up, come on, get down.
Yeah.
Sickness.
Yeah. Oh man.
That's amazing. King Gore is here. Hey, William Hickey. That's right. Michael McDowell had also worked on Beetlejuice. That's right. May he rest in peace. I would love to do a show on him one day. I think that guy was just such a great writer. But let's get into it. The first movie review we'll have here tonight. This one, we can go as in-depth as you want to go. Granted, I don't know how deep you want to get here. As the two horror masters, I honestly would say these are the best two ever. I really believe that are the best two horror
favorites. Yeah.
In my mind of all time, as Dario Argento and George Romero joined forces in the directing department. Of course, this was just 13 or so years removed from the fateful trip to Italy where George writes Dawn of the Dead and Dario helps finance it. And of course, there is the Argento cut of our all-time favorite movie. Here they team up. They wanted to do basically a fatal four-way with Craven and Carpenter. For whatever reason, Craven and Carpenter didn't do it. They backed out. I don't know. I never understood why Carpenter did, because Carpenter wasn't doing anything at that time. Craven was more busy. But here we have it. It's Two Evil Eyes, man. Two Evil Eyes from 1990. I guess I could do brief plot synopsis as you show that up. A duo of Edgar Allan Poe adaptations about a greedy wife's attempt to embezzle her dying husband's fortune and a sleazy reporter's adaptation of A Strange Black Cat. I have a controversial opinion. Granted, it's not too controversial, but to me it is. I think this is the biggest disappointment in horror's history. I believe that. There are worse movies than this, but with these two names, I've never been more disappointed in a movie. I can't lie. I don't even think it's a piece of shit. I just think it's a disappointment. But what are your thoughts? Do you remember, this is, again, since you said 1990 was a big movie year for you, was this one of the first Romero movies you ever saw? Argento? What was your first exposure to it?
This was, I think the first time I even heard of it, it was during that Dario Argento documentary they had on IFC back in the day, An Eye for Horror. And I saw it, I was like, because this was probably right around the time I was starting to really get into George, really get into Dario. And I was like, holy shit, they did a movie together. I got to check this out. This has got to be amazing. Like what I've never, and they would show clips, like of the best stuff, like of the pendulum thing going. I'm just like, this looks fucking cool. And then I watched the movie and I was just like, what is this? Like, this is not. And to me, like, Dario's half of the film is definitely the better half. I think I'll admit. Like, I'm not the biggest fan of George's part in that film. To me, it's just a little too slow. There's not. It feels almost like a daytime soap opera at times or something. Like it's
an episode of Murder, She Wrote. That's what
Yeah, it doesn't do it for me. But Dario's version's not bad. His half with Harvey Keitel and not bad. But I think overall, the first time I saw it, I was just like, and I'm still to this day, this is my least favorite Romero film of all of his films. This is probably my least. And to this day, I still try to go back. I try to watch it with fresh eyes, and it's just not happening. Like, it just doesn't.
Two fresh evil eyes, you try to watch it?
Yeah, I try. I'm just like, let me clear my mind. Let me clear my expectations and just try to watch it for what it is. And it's still just like, it's just nothing there, man. I don't know.
I feel that completely. And I was the same way because super into Dario, super into Romero. And when I found it, I was like, oh my God, like, because always, I watched my first exposure to knowing they were even friends was watching the Dead Will Walk featurette on the Dawn of the Dead Blu-ray. And he tells the story, you come to Italy. And he came to Italy. And I was like, what a story. Like, what a beautiful story. Argento's making Suspiria, which goes on to be by most considered to be his magnum opus, as Romero is making his, and they collaborated, went out to dinners with, Christine and all that stuff. And it's just such a wonderful story as these two guys who were up and coming literally both made their best movie at the same time, with the, aid and guidance of the other. And then, if you told me this movie was going to be made after those two movies, I mean, I wonder what Two Evil Eyes would have became. And it probably would have been a masterpiece because both those guys were in their prime. Whereas here, Argento is coming off Opera, which in my opinion is the last golden era Argento movie. After that, it moves on. There's other great art. Like I love Stenhall, love Mother of Tears. There's other good Argentos, but that was really the end of the prime. Like after he separated with Daria, it just seemed like that was the end of the prime. And here, man, I just look at both segments. I really don't care much for. I would agree. I think Dario's is better, but here's my biggest question and my biggest bafflement of this. I don't think either guy said Poe at all. I mean, granted, George's segment has the classic Romero themes. You were mentioning that in your commentary. It has themes of greed and all these classic Romero tropes and stuff like that. I just don't think either one of these guys said Poe. Why not have both of them use their own creative minds, or somebody else, or Dario's case, even have a writer. I just wonder, why did they go with Poe here as opposed to their own creative minds? That's my biggest question and bafflement of this movie. Why do you think that was?
Well, I think this film particularly was more of an Argento film than a Romero film. This was definitely an Argento passion project, more so than a Romero passion project, because Argento's talked about many times about how much he was influenced and inspired by the writings of Poe and when he was a young boy. So he always wanted to do something pertaining to Edgar Allan Poe. And he just kind of had this idea of like, hey, we could do 4 different stories. I mean, and he, like you said, he tried to get Wes Craven, John Carpenter, George Romero. George Romero was the only one that wanted to do it. And I think George just kind of agreed to do it because, to me, like, I'm not the biggest Edgar Allan Poe fan.
Me neither.
But I have an appreciation for it. And I think George was kind of the same way. And he was just not the biggest. Because Argento loved Edgar Allan Poe. George was just like, yeah, I respect what he did, but I wouldn't say he was a huge influence on me. So I think George just kind of did this for Dario, just for an opportunity to work with Dario. So I think that's why it turned out the way it did, where it felt like there was a little more like, and I'm like you, I don't think Argento's portion of the film is the greatest thing he ever did, but it's definitely better than George's, just because I think there was more passion behind it than George's, where I think George was just it was almost like a work for hire for him or something.
Yeah. Do you think the length of? I think the length of both segments really hurt it too, because obviously they wanted to do 4, and that mentality, half hour, and they all do 4 segments to equal a 2-hour movie. Instead, you just have the 2 of them splitting an hour, and I really think it hurts the Romero segment the most, because a lot of it is just Adrian Barbeau, and I forget the other actor's name. Maybe Rami Sada was his name.
Rami Sada. Yeah.
They had no chemistry, and it was cool to see Adrian Barbeau back, and it's cool to see like some Creepshow alum in there. And they even have him mention, he goes, "Give this to Mr. Pratt," and I was like, "Oh, Mr. Pratt!"
yeah.
I was like, "Oh my God!" I marked out when I rewatched that. I was like, I never noticed that. But it just doesn't have. It's as oxymoronic as I'll sound, it doesn't have any life to it. There's a story about some guy coming back from the dead, and again the themes of greed and all of that from this couple. I just don't think it has such bad pacing problems. It has no life to it or oomph. And you're right, maybe it was just he did it as a favor to his friend and wanted to work, and they, in theory, those 2 names would sell a lot of tickets, but it didn't really work.
Yeah, I don't think it got a major release in the U.S. I think it played like a handful of theaters one weekend, and then it was done. Like, it was very underseen for a lot of. I don't know why. I mean, you'd think Argento, Romero, you could market that, but it barely did anything in the United States or even Italy. I don't think it was that successful. But
no, it's honestly a movie for both of them that I would easily just skip. Like if I'm doing a marathon of either guy, I'm not really stopping to watch either one of these segments. I think it's a very, it's funny in the year of 1990 where you have Tales from the Dark Side, which I consider probably a top 10 horror anthology. You also have this, which is just, I don't know, kind of a fart in church. I never really cared for it. Again, it has, go ahead.
I will say the one thing that I think is kind of cool about this film is the fact that I may be mistaken, but this may be the first time that Argento came to America to shoot a film.
It was.
He came to Pittsburgh to shoot Two Evil Eyes. And one of the funniest stories I remember hearing George tell, or it may have been Tom, either Savini or George, which I think Savini's effects in this film are actually very, very, very good.
They are.
It's some of his best stuff. But one of the funniest stories is Argento's favorite part of being in Pittsburgh and being in the United States the whole time. He fucking loved buffalo wings.
Really?
So I have this mental picture in my head of Dario Argento, like 100 pounds soaking wet, long hair, like just gnawing down on some fucking buffalo wings as he's like, hey, action. Yay, very, very good, you know. And so that mental image to me, I cracked up when I first heard that.
That's amazing. I didn't know that. I did know. I've heard the great behind-the-scenes story on this movie that is better than the movie itself to me, is that Harvey Keitel's agent wrote a letter to like Savini and Argento and everyone working on that segment of the film saying that Harvey will never be in contact with his severed head and all this, like this giant letter being like, if he comes in contact, like he will leave, he will walk, all this shit. And then Savini's like, hey, I gotta ask. And he's like, yeah, what's up? He's like, Harvey, why did you write this letter? He's like, oh, I would just get the spooks. How would you get the creeps? And that was it. And they all laughed it off. I'm like, dude, they had this guy go through the trouble of writing this fucking letter. Like, I would love to have been like the person who received this, have been like, Dario, come here, check this out. Like, I love that story better than the movie itself.
It's a great story, yeah.
It's gold, man. But yeah, no, he would also, I think, go on to do Trauma this a few years later with this, and then that would also be in the United States with like Brad Dourif and Ozzy Argento, and a lot of people considered that to be a big misstep in his career as well, although I don't mind the movie. But let's get back to comments here. Let's see what you guys have to say. Even though I like the 90s remake, I still prefer the original. I'm in the same boat. If compared to remakes, 90s is a top 10 remake for me.
100%.
Sadly, Carpenter was about to make Memoirs of an Invisible Man, which, according to Carpenter, now was his worst. That's a horrible movie. That's an even worse. See, that's a bad movie. I would say it's a worse movie than Two Evil Eyes. Two Evil Eyes is a bit of a misstep for both these guys, but I do like the Argento one quite a bit. I rewatched it for the first time in a while, and I liked it a little bit more too. I definitely was like, all right, because it just really, the Romero one is just like, I can't lie to you. I paused it 3 times, and I'm not usually.
It's tough to get through, man. It's tough to get through. Where Argento's, at least there's stuff happening throughout the story. You know, there's, the great effects of like the pendulum and the great camera movements. And then, of course, the giant Harvey Keitel on a stick scene like that.
And Harvey Keitel meowing like a cat.
Yeah,
like, it's entertaining
to see, yeah.
The Romero one, it's like, it feels like an episode of Murder, She Wrote, where you're like, all right, is this the commercial? Where's Angela Lansbury's old ass at? And then Tom Atkins shows up as a cop at the end, and I'm like, it's funny because he's a cop in Bruiser, so it's like it started this decade with Atkins as a cop and ended with it. Bought Two Evil Eyes of Blind a few years back, pretty forgettable entry. They did a 4K of it, and I didn't even care. I was like,
that's one I haven't even got.
That's one of those where if I saw it in a dollar bin, I would get it just to add to the collection and say, I just added an Argento and a Romero, but that's about it. Yeah. I love the trailer to the original Suspiria, which shows a woman brushing her hair and she turns around to be revealed as a skeleton. Yes, love that trailer. The Romero segment is my least favorite thing he's ever directed. Wow. So, okay, he's right there with you, Alpha. I like Dario Argento's segment the most because it's stylish, but the writing is not the best. Well, that's sometimes Dario's MO, to be honest. It's style over substance. Two Evil Eyes is fine, but disappointing at the same time. Yeah, I just consider with the two names, and Mateos took the words right out of my mouth. Can we say that due to the stature of the two directors, the movie is a bit flat? Yes. I don't think there's any debate about that. Even the most diehard fan of both these guys, I think, would have to admit this is not even at the top echelons of their top work. The creative contrast is too heavy. Yeah, I don't think either guy worked for Poe. And it's not like Argento did 20 Poe adaptations. This was it. He never did another Poe. So it's weird of this big fan, and he never did another one before or after. Very odd. I remember Two Evil Eyes coming out in the UK, and it just came and went. Same with Tales from the Dark Side. I think Tales from the Dark Side, did Tales from the Dark Side the movie do okay in the States? Like
it did okay. I don't think it was a huge success, but neither was 990.
Yeah. Romero's story in Two Evil Eyes is really the only thing that's watchable about it. Okay, so Sean Blue likes Romero's segment better. It might be a strong story, but the acting is so good. Really? Okay, so I would say I would probably lean towards the Argento segment, but interesting to hear the contrast. I like that. I'm not going to even lie. Even though I like Dario's segment, I felt he was out of his element in Pittsburgh. What would you say? Would you agree with that?
Yeah. I mean, I could see where he's coming from on that.
Yeah.
It didn't. I mean, yeah, we were all used to Argento and Europe and Italy and all that, and the visuals and the different architectural backgrounds and stuff. But I can see where he's coming from on that.
Yeah, for real. I can too. Unfortunately, Argento was out of his element. There you go. So, okay. Sean thinks he was. Donnie, you're out of your element. This is the little Big Lebowski moment. Wow, they did a 4K of Two Evil Eyes. Damn. Yeah, that's people were hitting me up about it. They're like, "Oh, you getting this?" I'm like, honestly, I'm not spending $30 on that. Like, no. Like,
oh, dude, they have it here at the local FYE or whatever, and it's like $60, and I'm just like, not a fucking chance.
Not even close. Like, literally divide that by 10, and I might get it for $6. Yeah. Otherwise, no thanks. LO, Two Evil Eyes isn't bad as you guys make it out to be, but it's still interesting to hear everyone's thoughts. I don't know. I think. Compare it to opera, compare it to even Romero's next movie, The Dark Half, I don't think it's worthy of them personally. But yeah, it's not, I wouldn't say it's a piece of shit. It's just not that great either. Really enjoyed that chicken wing story. Not the greatest film, but still incredible they got together. Yeah, exactly. It's kind of a cool story. Tom Atkins also played the cop in Night of the Creeps. Thrill me. Of course, he plays a cop in everything. And Maniac Cop. Argento's segment is a mess. Feels like the story goes all over the place with the atmosphere. I still like it though. Okay, so Sean Blue a little bit different than us. That's cool. Oh, like I said, always like to hear the other opinion. And I guess that was it for 1990. So definitely a high, array of stuff. And then, of course, in 91, he directs this movie that I have here on Old School. You'll appreciate this, Alpha. Some VHS goodness here.
I don't have that one actually.
You don't own it? You don't own the Blu-ray?
No, the VHS. I don't have the.
I was going to say I regret not getting the Blu-ray because it's out of print now. It goes for about $100, and it actually has a segment where Romero talks about this era of his career. There you go. I regret it to this day not getting that. I'm an idiot for not getting that. But of course, this was directed and finished around late '91. Orion shelves it until '93, but this is the next movie we'll be talking about. Brief plot synopsis. It only is a sentence. A writer's fictional alter ego wants to take over his life at any price. That's a horrible fucking plot synopsis, but that's what IMDb gave me. The Dark Half from 1993. One of my most least watch Romero movies, but not necessarily a bad movie, and I actually think it's quite good. But what are your thoughts on this one, man?
I'm kind of in the same boat as you with The Dark Half. It's not one that I go back to a whole lot and rewatch or, think about too much. But it's one that when I do go back and watch it, I always, by the end of it, I'm like, that was, every time I'm always like, that was a little better than I remember,
Yeah.
But it's definitely one of those that to me feels more like a good Stephen King adaptation as opposed to a good Romero film, if that makes any sense. It's one of the last films I think it was like the last film he made in Pittsburgh for one. So it was the last time he worked with John Amplis, who played the Timothy Hutton's double in a lot of those scenes. Tom didn't work on that one. But yeah, it's one of those films that like I said, it's I don't love it. I don't watch it a whole lot. I'm not the biggest fan of it, but it's one that I do think is a good film. I think it's a good Stephen King adaptation. Mm-hmm. But it's not one of my absolute favorites by any means.
It's me. It's not for me either, but it is. I agree with you. Every time I watch it, I like it a little bit more. It's one of those where it's like, okay, it definitely seems like after Two Evil Eyes, this was Romero trying to make a more studio film. Like up until now, he had only really done Creepshow. That was like his big studio film, and of course, the guy he was working with is the guy he's working with here. 9 years later in Stephen King. Or actually, no, 11 years later. I'm sorry, it would be 11 years later that this, well, I guess technically 9. Yeah, 9 because it was 91. So sorry. It came out in 93. But I think this is an interesting movie in Romero's career because it really feels like he's trying to become more of a commercialized director. And some of the style in here, I think, is really underrated. Now, I did watch this on VHS tape to rewatch, but there's some interesting sequences where he really goes Argento with the lighting. Like there's that great murder sequence in the hotel building where it keeps its red light, blue light, red light, blue light. I was like, that's nothing that you really see in a lot of Argento films other than maybe Creepshow where he's playing with the lighting like that. But I thought that was gorgeous. I was like, wow, like he showed me something there. And I think his style as a director here is very slick and it's very well directed film from George. Now, I know that there was tremendous problems with this thing. Of course, the guy they casted being Timothy Hutton as the lead because he was a name, if you will. Granted, I don't think anyone was really going to see this movie for Timothy Hutton. If anything, they were really going to see it for Stephen King's name and George's name attached to that. The names I've heard batted around to play the Thad Beaumont character are so much better than the guy they got. Like, I know I'm sure you probably know them, but we can go one by one. The first guy I know they were thinking was Defoe, which we ended up basically getting to see that in the Spider-Man movie where he's playing the Green Goblin / Norman Osborn. And tell me how first we attack his heart. We eventually got to see that, and it's a lot better than the performance of Timothy Hutton in this movie. Of course, they also had Gary Oldman was a guy that they had batted around. Holy shit. Could you have imagined Gary Oldman? Like,
well, the name that's sticks out to me because he's actually in The Dark Half, but George wanted him to play the role of
Rooker.
But it's Michael Rooker. And I thought, when I heard that, I was like, that would have been fucking perfect because Rooker can play, toned down, like kind of what he plays in the film. He's just kind of this toned down, whatever. But Henry, Portrait of a Serial Killer, he can go straight up fucking psycho, That would have been an interesting. I think that would have been a better casting choice. I don't hate Timothy Hutton in this film. I think his work as George Stark is better than his work as Thad Beaumont in terms of the two characters. But even then, I still think there's something lacking there. And I know him and George kind of butted heads here and there. I know he butted heads with pretty much everybody on the set.
Yeah, he did. He did all this. Well, also with Michael Rooker, what they told him was, we can't cast him because he can't play the good part. He can't play the light half, for lack of a better term. And what they end up having him do, they had him play the good sheriff.
Right.
So God damn it, Orion, what are you smoking? Like they ended up doing it anyway. So
there's a reason they were going bankrupt at the time. Let's just say that.
Exactly, because you couldn't have said it better. And I agree. I would have, of those three, as much as Defoe probably would have chewed this scenery and everyone would remember it forever, Rooker would be the guy I would have picked too. And I think Romero was right on the right track. But again, that goes to show you that he wasn't really the guy calling the shots now. He had his creative fun with Night Riders. He had his creative fun with Dawn of the Dead. He didn't have to answer to anybody. Here with a studio film, you have to answer to people, and I think it hurts the film. It really shows that Romero really, I don't think, ever should have tried to become commercialized. Now, I get why he did, because he had talent, and he was fantastic, and I would have probably done the same thing if I was him. But it goes to show you that, even when we get to Bruiser at the end of this show, I like that movie better just because it feels more George. It feels like no one's holding him back. Creative control is his. And I think that's the most important thing with Romero. If he makes this movie with Michael Rooker, who knows? Maybe we'd like it a lot more and it'd be received a lot better. Now, I agree. I don't mind Timothy Hutton in the role, but again, with those three names, I take any of the three over Timothy Hutton. And I know he was an asshole on set. He did a lot of the method acting. Like he had to do the two trailers, one for Thad, one for George Stark. They got into a shouting match apparently over a bullshit shot where he was supposed to just be driving in the car and there wasn't any acting going on. And Romero was like, okay, we're doing this simple shot. And he argued with him about it. And just absolutely wild. You know, you don't hear this stuff with oh, did Scott Reiniger ever have a argument with George or John Amplis?
Exactly, yeah.
You know, it just goes to show you that I think Timothy Hutton thought he was bigger than he was, or just took the method acting slightly too far.
Well, Hutton was coming off of an Oscar nomination at the time. He was nominated for an Oscar like a year or so before he was cast. That's why the studio wanted him.
Really? I always thought his Oscar nomination was like a decade before this. Wasn't it? What the fuck was it? It was like Ordinary People.
Yeah. It may have been. I don't know. But at some point, I mean, he was kind of a.
There you go, Mateo's. What year was Ordinary People, Mateo? Was it like early 80s? I would like 80, 81. That's what I thought. Maybe it was 90, 91, and I'm wrong. I don't know. I thought it was 80, 81. But like the supporting cast, I think is great. I love Michael Rooker, Amy Madigan, who I always remember from Uncle Buck.
Yeah.
And Field of Dreams. Like, I love her in the movie. I think she's great. I love the lady playing the like professor in the school. I didn't notice this until this past time watching, because I was like, who is this lady? Like, this lady did a really, really good job. That's Julie Harris, who also was in The Haunting 30 years before this. I never noticed that was the same lady. I was like, holy shit, like 30 years later, she's in a Romero film. Like, how cool is that? What do you think is the reason, though, that we don't go back to this one as much as others? Like, what makes it as less watchable? You know, like I would go back and watch The Crazies over this, Night Riders over this. Why is this not as rewatchable as maybe some of George and Stephen King, for that matter, other works?
For me personally, I mean, to me, it doesn't feel as much of a George film as it does like just a regular like an okay Stephen King film or something. Like, there's just certain elements about that I love about George that this film just didn't have. Tom Savini was not on this film doing the effects. George was not editing this film. He didn't pick his DP. They picked a DP for him that he did not get along with. That was another element, that the studio butting in and saying, you know, your DP is going to be this guy because he's really good. He's not the guy that you want because he sucks. And George just like, fine, fuck it. But I just think that there's a lot, like there are still some elements. Like I said, it's the last film that he shot in Pittsburgh. Like Tom Dubinsky, of course, was still working on the film. John Amplis, we mentioned. Like, there were still a lot of Pittsburgh names attached to this film. I do think the score is really good. Christopher Young, I think, he's the same guy that does the score for Hellraiser. But there's certain parts about that work. But to me, this is one of the films that feels the least like a Romero film. Maybe just the choice in actors, maybe like even in like his portion in Two Evil Eyes, there's still Tom Atkins, Adrienne Barbeau, E.G. Marshall. You're like, oh, these are guys that George has worked with before, and
Creepshow alum,
yeah. So I don't know. The Dark Half just felt like something completely different. And like you said, I 100% agree. I think George at this time was trying to mold himself into what the studio system was kind of wanting at the time, as opposed to just kind of, and that was like talking about Richard Rubenstein earlier. That was the beautiful thing about their relationship, was Rubenstein would say, look, here's the money that I was able to raise. Go make your film. This is what you can do. This is what you can't do. Anything other than that, it's yours. And when Rubenstein went his separate ways from George, I think that aspect of George's career was kind of lost in a lot of ways. And I think The Dark Half is a really big symbol of that in a certain way.
Yeah, and even if you think about it, like Salah M. Hassanin, he was similar. Like, he gave Romero the free constraint. I mean, the person who produced this was the one and only time producer with Romero in Declan Baldwin.
Yeah,
and that's not a guy that he would. I mean, I know the Grunwalds would be after. They might have been involved with Two Evil Eyes, but Grunwald was more when he went to Canada and Bruiser and the last three Dead films, Land, Survival, Diary. Grunwald was the guy there, and I'm sure that he didn't really. I mean, maybe Universal had some say in Land of the Dead, but with Diary and Survival, they do feel like George films. Like, they definitely do, you know. Yeah. And I think Grunwald let him do that. Here, it definitely feels like the most restrained he ever was as using his own creative juices. But that's not to say there's not things I don't like about this movie. I really like the use of the Elvis song. Are you lonesome tonight? I liked that. I liked the whole surgery scene at the beginning, and I remember being so disappointed that it wasn't Tom Savini. I was like, that was amazing. Savini was really, and then people were like, no, he died. I'm like, what? I'm like, you gotta be shitting me. But no. Granted, it's a lot masked on this VHS, but the effects at the end with the birds, it doesn't look that bad on this. But if you watch this in like a 4K or Blu-ray or whatever, I could imagine it looking really quite bad.
There are definitely moments, like at the very end when the birds are flying into the sky and into another dimension or whatever the fuck is going on. That looks really terrible in HD. But outside of that, I mean, a lot of the like the bird effects and stuff at the end when they're just kind of circling and there's just all these birds going on every which way, like that still holds up pretty well.
When they're attacking like the George Stark, it works. There's parts of it where I'm like, because I was like, I need to watch this in like better quality just to see how this is hold up, and I'm like, yeah, some of this definitely. But again, I know Romero has said that they were running out of money at the time. They were trying to finish it, and that was like, one of the things he wishes could have been done a little better. They rushed through that, which happens, man. That's sometimes that is what it is. I definitely think that this movie is a little bit top heavy for me. Like the first hour of it, I'm with it. I almost wish it was just an hour and a half. Like I think you could have cut at least 20 minutes, even an hour 40 would have worked. I think there's just a little bit in the middle that drags. And then the finale, how do you feel about the finale in this one? Because every time I watch it, I'm always like, it's a little drawn out. Like I feel like it could have just came to a climax quicker than it did. But what do you feel about the finale of this movie?
I agree with you on that. Like it is. I agree with the idea that the whole film in general is a little too drawn out, but the finale, again, it's one of those like by the time, the more I watch it, the more I like it. I think it works. I think it builds really well. I think like I said, the effects are really well done. I think the performances are really good. So I've never really had an issue with the ending per se. But like you said, a lot of the stuff in the middle and some of it is a little drawn out for my liking. But
yeah, like I do like don't get me wrong, the stuff in the cemetery, I was like, I like this. And the first kill sequence, I was like, this is really like he's really showing his director chops here. Like I was very impressed by the direction. And I'm like, man, like where are we going from here? Hopefully this builds up to like a really wild finale. And I don't know, maybe for some people it is. I just never felt that the ending stuck quite as much as the beginning. Like,
well, I know they had to go back and reshoot the ending because I think the original ending had the birds carrying his corpse up to the heavens or whatever, and I guess it just didn't quite look right or work the way it should have. So they just ended up just tearing him to a billion pieces. Spoiler alert. So yeah, I don't know. It is what it is to me.
And before we get to the comments, I know you said the cinematographer, like they didn't get along with he didn't get along with the DOP. What exactly was the story with that? Was it like something about lighting, and like Romero was trying to argue with him that like the house wouldn't be lit or something? I forget the exact story. Do you know that story?
Yeah, I remember hearing something about that where. I think it was something where there was the house that they end up going to at the end of the film. That house, apparently there was like a shot where where the DP wanted every light in the house to be on.
Oh, that's right. And there was nobody home.
And George is like, but there's nobody home, so that would make sense with the DP's like, but it would look so great, George, And George is just like, but that makes no sense. So just little things like that where like the DP would be wanting to do one thing his way, but George would be like, no, we're going to do it this way. Or instead of a long shot, we're just going to do kind of like what George always did, 3 short shots, 3 quick cutting and stuff. And they just butt heads on that. And it was just,
yeah, it's a shame. It seemed like everything with this movie was a fight. It was a fight with Timothy Hutton. It was a fight with the cinematographer. It was the fight for creative control. It was a fight to make the ending. It was a fight with Orion, who for some reason shelved the movie for 2 years and then give it a really weak marketing campaign and just kind of dropped it in theaters. And on a $15 million budget, this movie made a little over 10. So commercially, the movie bombs. It only ran for a couple weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks tops. And I think that's a damn shame because I don't know. I think maybe with a little bit better marketing campaign, maybe a little bit better of a lead performance. This is one of those movies where, as much as I actually kind of like the movie and I agree with you, it grows on me. I look at this as more of a what could have been. Like, it's not a disappointment like Two Evil Eyes. I look at it more, this could have been like an A or S, but instead it's like a B, like that's kind of how I always looked at The Dark Half. But definitely one that I'm happy I rewatched for the show and we could talk about tonight, because definitely a movie, like you said, every time I watch it, I'm like, no, it's not that bad. It's just one that I don't ever grab for it. So, and I'm glad you mentioned that point, man. Maybe that's why. Maybe.
Yeah. It's funny. I actually hear just the other day, I guess just because I've been in the spirit of doing this stream. So I've been doing, like, I went back and rewatched Two Evil Eyes on a stream the other night. And I found this on eBay. It's an original shooting script of The Dark Half.
Ooh.
Property of Orion Pictures. And it's the 5th draft, dated October 6, 1990.
That is awesome.
Yeah, I mean, there's all kinds of like little notes and stuff that were written in here. I don't know who this belonged to, but it's pretty cool. So I was kind of excited. I was like, I can show this off on the stream when we're talking about The Dark Half.
That is really cool. I like that. I did not
read the script to kind of see, how much lines up with what the finished product was,
That is really cool. I don't know if you've ever read the original script for Day of the Dead, like the $6 million version that he wanted to make. That's like, to me, it's the best script I ever read that was never, like, it never got made.
Yeah. I read that in high school. I forget what class I was in, but I was on the internet and I found it and I just sat there and read it through the whole period. And I think I did the same for his Resident Evil script too. I found that online and read that. I never paid attention or did anything I was supposed to do in high school. I was always on eBay looking for Dawn of the Dead stuff or looking up. There was this website back in the day called Homepage of the Dead. And they used to have a forum on there, and it was just guys talking about. I mean, for a kid in Western Kentucky, a middle schooler who was obsessed with horror and Dawn of the Dead and all this stuff. It's like I was alone. Like there was nobody I could identify with this stuff. But back in the day, you'd find these little forums, and it was like, so I'd be like sitting there at the library in school, just like looking up all this stuff, like the original Day of the Dead script, and you'd find it, you download it,
No, hey, I relate. I can relate. I totally relate, man. I would be rolling around school with like Maniac t-shirt, and all these kids have like Bayside or fucking Nirvana or like all this shit. And granted, Nirvana had long gone, just like that was it. Was music, a very big music town here, and then I would roll in this class with the Maniac. What is he holding? Oh, is that a scalped head? Yeah, it's a great film. That we don't talk about it with you, But that was it. That I was definitely alone too, so I could totally relate to that. I love the reading scripts instead of doing arithmetic. That's
right.
That's
yeah,
amazing.
It was funny. My drama teacher, we always used to talk about, and she used to be like, "Oh, I just love like lighting. I'm so obsessed with lighting and all this." So I brought her a copy of Suspiria to take home and watch, and she brought it back. She brought it back the next day. It's like I got through like 10 minutes of that, and I was like, I can't watch this. And
I thought you like lighting, lady.
Yeah, I was like, come on, you said lighting.
Yeah, I own the out of print Blu-ray of The Dark Half and got the VHS a month ago. That's awesome. I found this VHS at a random retro gaming place, and it was like all of $5. You can't see it, but it says $5 on the back. I was like, dude, what? I was like sold. And it's not a rip or a scratch or anything on here. So it's like brand spanking new. And because I missed out on the Blu-ray, I said $5 that you could take my money. I will admit the first time I saw Two Evil Eyes was a 35mm print screening, and I was excited to finally see it. And I was totally let down, but eventually, okay. So I was let down too, man. It hasn't grown on me. And I just rewatched it, but I definitely, maybe over time, maybe it'll be like The Dark Half. Because I always
another 10 years.
Yeah, who knows? I'll be nostalgic for it by the time it's in the 2030s. Whenever I watch The Dark Half, I always like it more than the last time. Agree. Not one of my go-to Romero films, but it's quite good. Maybe a bit underrated. I think for George's directing, it's a movie I'd point to. Like it's weird. It's like the first half of his career. And I know you mentioned this on your show, and I agree wholeheartedly about how great of an editor George was. Like you watch. you know, even though I don't think it's a great movie, There's Always Vanilla, the way that movie's edited is fantastic, you know, and he always says it's a movie he more edited than directed. And even Season of the Witch and, you know, the longer cut, especially The Crazies, like I love how he edited his movies. In my opinion, pound for pound, the best editor of all time was George Romero. You know, here though, I see the great director that, like, you know, we all go on and on about. To me, that's the big reason to watch this for myself. Defoe would have killed it, but we got Timothy Hutton dressed as Lamb. Yeah, pretty much. I mean, yeah. Steele is here. What's going on, buddy? Timothy Hutton was great in Ordinary People. For me, The Dark Half is meh. Yeah, I can see that. It was 1980. Okay, cool. Somebody confirmed that. People saying hi. King Gore says, hi, Steele. People saying hi. Fun fact, Romero means rosemary in Espanol, want to grow on the kids. Okay, very cool. Critics in the mainstream press were just so unfair to horror films during this period, and I think it was one of the causes for the decline of some of the masters. Well, I mean, yeah, all of them declined, really. All of them. Maybe Craven had the best run at this time, but again, it's not like, you know, Vampire in Brooklyn did anything or New Nightmare did anything. It wasn't until Scream. Although People Under the Stairs was a hit. Yeah, it was definitely a corny-ass trend that these people love to follow. Terrence. Dark Half, another S. Oh, wow. Okay. Stephen King story. Oh, I'm sorry. They're just like rating an S. Another S King story that doesn't translate well to screen. Okay, fair enough. I thought you were giving it an S for a minute. Let's see. I'd watched Candyman 5 times in a row before any Scream film. Yep. Which story? Is it the one with the lights? I'm not sure which story, Aiden. Yeah, I think you're right about that, Terrence. Okay, you guys are talking to one another. Let's see. I want to get to roll through these a little bit. Oh no, not another one from Kentucky. Right, I am out of here. No, you're fine, man. Chris C, the slasher dude. Evening all. Slash the like. Thank you, sir. I appreciate that. I feel like the critics thing was a big deal before the internet really came in and made a difference. Totally. Folks missing out on classics due to the horror visuals is criminal. I mean, yeah, it happens. But yeah, no. So after this, George Romero would not direct another movie until the last movie we talk about tonight, which will be Bruiser. But after this, I believe this is how it went, was The Dark Half did not do well commercially. Like I said, it made like 10.5 on a budget of 15, didn't do well. This is where Romero turned and wrote his script for Dead Reckoning, which would have been his dead film of the 90s, which we never ever got, sadly. Now, I know you were telling me before the show about 90% of what that script becomes land. Let's talk about it. Do you think that movie needed to be made in this decade? Would it have saved his career? Would it have happened if he perhaps had directed Pet Sematary?
I don't think so. I think common theme, I just saw a lot of those comments, was just like the horror was down in the mid 90s at this point. I don't think another Romero zombie film in the mid 90s, I don't think it would have happened, even if he had done Pet Sematary. Because I mean, think about what zombie films were big in the mid 90s that came out in the mid 90s. I mean, it was pretty much a dead genre.
Everything was really dead.
Yeah. So I don't know how much of a blip on the radar another Romero zombie film would have been at that time, which, I mean, maybe it did just take another decade. You know, a lot, you know, like I said, a lot of what's in the Dead Reckoning script ends up in Land of the Dead. I mean, of course, the Dead Reckoning itself is, you know, but I think a lot of the relevant social commentary or whatever, I don't think there was a lot of that for George to really pick up on in the 90s. I know a lot of it was still about, you know, walling yourself off from the rest of the world and just trying to ignore the problem while trying to rebuild this imaginary utopia with like the Fiddler's Green and all that. But I think a lot of the post 9/11 stuff, I think that George was inspired by for Land of the Dead was kind of missing from that original Dead Reckoning script.
In a lot of ways, though,
especially the Kaufman character. I mean, that's a total take on George W. Bush and Donald Rumsfeld, and so.
In a lot of ways, do you think though that like he could have maybe said something about horror at this time? Because we keep saying it was dead, it was dead, it was dead. Well, what better to do than make a movie about the dead?
That's a great point. That's a great point.
I wonder, like part of me wonders if like what would have happened if Dead Reckoning comes out here as opposed to Land of the Dead. Like, if that happens, do we get Survival and Diary? Do those movies happen, or do we maybe skip right over Land and go straight to Diary in the 2000s, where it's his whole kind of preach and message upon people stop to look, not to help. I wonder the Day of the Dead doing bad domestically. Now I know it's a big misconception. Oh, Day of the Dead bombed. It did well overseas. It bombed in this country. It bombed the United States. It bombed domestically. It made like $3 million as opposed to what Dawn of the Dead did. So that's what I always say. It's like it didn't bomb necessarily because it did well overseas. It bombed here. Did that maybe play a factor? Could he not find a producer at the time? Because I know he had just worked with a one-timer and then a movie that commercially didn't do well. I wonder, like, it must have been so many different reasons as to why this didn't happen. But like, I do think, in a lot of ways, maybe you're right. Maybe it needed another decade. Like maybe it needed to go to 2005. And then we ultimately get Land of the Dead, which I don't know. I always kind of looked at a little bit not as good as those original three. I don't know.
I don't think it ever could have been. I mean, the build up and the hype to that was just because it had been 20 years since we had gotten Day of the Dead, and George, like through this period of the 90s, was just kind of off the radar, and then he makes Bruiser, and then eventually he goes on. It's like Land of the Dead. George is coming back. He's making, he's got a budget. He's got John fucking Leguizamo. I mean, he's coming.
He's got Simon Baker.
Yeah, he's got Simon Baker. I mean, this jet Ozzy Argento. I mean,
so
it's like, so like there was like this whole hype. But to me, like I love George, the independent spirit, the independent filmmaker. Which is why I guess I always liked. The first time I saw Diary, I liked it more than the first time I saw Land, which I think over time I like Land a little more than Diary now, but Diary felt like independent spirit George. And I think especially, for Land of the Dead and especially around the mid-90s and around this time, George, there was nowhere to be independent. George didn't know how to be independent. His crew was gone. Tom wasn't doing effects or anything anymore around this time. A lot of his guys had moved to California.
And Romero had moved to Canada by this time, right? Or right around this time?
George didn't move to Canada until, I think it was the early 2000s is when he moved.
Okay, so he's still in Pittsburgh.
I think he was still in, I don't remember if he was in Pittsburgh or if he had moved out west. I know he was living in Florida for a while. He may have still been in Florida around this time, but would go to shoot in Pittsburgh. I could be wrong about that if somebody wants to correct me, but yeah, I mean, Pittsburgh was kind of a booming period, like a booming place to make films around the early 90s. I mean, you had Silence of the Lambs shot in Pittsburgh, Kingpin, my favorite comedy of all time.
Love Kingpin.
Shot in Pittsburgh. I mean, a lot of films were being made in Pittsburgh at this time, but George's crew was gone. I mean, he was kind of left alone at this period. So I don't think George really knew how to be independent in Pittsburgh anymore. And I think that's why he kind of got stuck in like this developmental hell where he was just developing these scripts left and right that were just getting rejected. And I think at this point, the studio just kind of looked at him as yesterday's news. Like he were just like, oh, George Romero, the zombie guy from 20 years ago. We're good. We're looking for the next big thing. Kind of the same way that they were kind of doing a lot of the old classic horror directors around this time. And especially they could point back and look, it's like, oh, look, the Dark Half, not a success. Two Evil Eyes, not a success.
Monkey Shines, Day of the Dead. None of the movies made money in the United States. You have to look back to Creepshow, to the last movie that he actually made that was a big commercial and critical hit in the United States, which at this point was over 13 years. So it's like, I could see why they were coming from that standpoint, but it's like for fans like us, I feel like we may have been robbed. I really do. I feel like we may have been robbed here because I really would have liked to have seen, okay, he's still in Pittsburgh and it would have the feel of maybe a movie like this, which again was it was in Pittsburgh. Like I definitely think it would have felt more George than Land of the Dead ultimately feels. Land of the Dead feels very Canadian. It feels very, commercial and studio. And that movie's only really made because of the zombie boom of the early like 28 Days Later, the Dawn remake, and for better or for worse, that zombie boom, I think, is the reason he gets the opportunity to make a fourth Dead movie, where it's like, let's give George the keys to the kingdom again. Maybe he can do another Dawn. Maybe he can do another Day, Night, whatever. Maybe, and I think that was the goal. And, when that movie finally comes out, it seems like Romero fans alike were kind of like left with it was okay. Like, that seems like the big general consensus.
It wasn't terrible.
Yeah, it just was okay. It just wasn't, I don't know. And I know I remember when the one time when I met George and they did the whole Q&A and it was packed. I mean, it was standing room only to Q&A for George Romero. It was fantastic. And he goes, one thing I hear all the time is people come up to me and go, man, that movie wasn't you. Like, you just don't say a big budget. And it was like, sounded like it hurt him, like, for people to say that. And I felt bad. I was like, damn, I feel that way, but I would never fucking say it to him. Like, it's like, I don't know. I don't know. A part of me wishes it had come out at this time, though, just out of curiosity. And I think it might have been better than the Land of the Dead we got. But again, it's a big, what could have been,
Yeah, like I said, I think it's just a matter of timing for, like I said, the mid 90s. He really was kind of in limbo. He was in no man's land. He didn't know how to be independent at this time, and he also wasn't in demand for the studios, so he was just trying to get anything made at this point, and trying to do anything he could. And I think, but like you said, by the time the mid 2000s, we have the zombie resurrection, 28 Days Later, to me, is the film that resurrected the zombie genre.
Yes.
If you create, like, changed the way that zombies were portrayed, and then everything past that. But so yeah, I think that, on top of, like you said, I don't like it, but the Dawn remake made a lot of money, so people were like, hey, well, let's make another one of those. And what about the guy that made the first one? It's like, yeah, I think he wants to do one. Well, let's give him a shot.
Yeah, like, where is he? Oh, he did a direct-to-video movie in 2000? Let's get him back.
He's still alive. Let's do it. All right.
Let's give it a shot. Where's Edgar Wright? Shaun of the Dead. Aiden says, I was laughing about the dark hat. Okay, that is such a funny argument. Like, but that's what it is sometimes. That is exactly what it is. Ben Grimm. Oh, well, yeah, this is a point we're going to mention in just a short bit after the Resident Evil discussion. I read in Brendan Fraser Mummy when that Romero was supposed to do the Mummy movie with the mummies being more like zombies, but it fell through. That is true. We'll talk about that. That's our next topic after the Resident Evil talk. And Romero Pet Sematary still would be interesting. Oh, I agree. I would love to have seen that. Then Steven Sommers made What We Have Now, which is, I mean, I still like it. It's a guilty, maybe because I saw it as a kid. I always liked that movie fine. I got to agree with King Gore, who said before that Land may have hit more in the 90s. Yeah, I was dying for another zombie entry during that time. I agree. It might have hit more in the 90s. But again, it might have hit less at this. Like, you totally throw that argument because nothing was hitting at all, really, until 96. Pretty sure George had an apartment in Toronto at some point. Yeah, I know he was in – I thought he was in Canada – around 95, 96. That's what I thought he moved. But it may – I know Bruisier's Canadian, so that's like shot in 99. So by 99, he's definitely in Canada with Grunwald. Monkey Shines is goated. Okay. Echo Sarah, hello. What's up, Echo Sarah? Monkey Shines is still growing on me, watchable, but it could be dreadful to sit through for me. I understand that. I'm in the same boat with that and Dark Half. I want to like them more than I do. I listened to the Dark Half audio commentary on the out-of-print Blu-ray, and producer called one of Romero's scripts or an actor he wanted to work with Yesterday's Pizza. That line is in Bruiser. Well, Bruiser has a lot of pent-up shit that we're going to finale with tonight, so I'm excited. Hey, that's cool, Terrence. Okay, cool. Where did he move in Canada? That's a good fucking question. Do you know what part of Canada he moved to?
Toronto.
It was Toronto?
Yeah.
Okay. So there you go.
That's where his gravesite is. He was buried in Toronto.
Okay, there you go. So Mateo, I know Mateo's a diehard Toronto Blue Jays guy, so that's very cool to know. So there you go, Mateo. He moved to Toronto. So moving on though, into something he directed, not a film, but a commercial in Resident Evil 2, which was so fucking cool that I watched it after work today. I was like, oh my God, I have to watch this for show prep. Like, it's a whole minute long. And I thought it was kind of cool, man, to see Romero doing something like this. And of course, the mid to late 90s is when gaming started booming. Like, that's when the original PlayStation, I got the original PlayStation, I believe, 2000, and then the PS2 came out in 01. Whatever the new system comes out, I get the first one. Like PS3, I didn't get till 2013, and then the PS4 was coming out. But I got the PlayStation 1 and Crash Bandicoot and Spyro the Dragon and Resident Evil was a big, game around that time. Really cool to see him direct this commercial. I had a fun time watching it. But of course is the conversation with the movie. And I know you were saying you read the script. I have not had the privilege to read the script, but what do you think, man? I guess starting off, do you like the commercial? And second, do you think it would have been an interesting move for him at the time to have been selected to do the Resident Evil movie that I know doesn't come out till 2002, but the talks were around this time?
Yeah. I remember, around this time, I guess you could probably say that Resident Evil video games kind of started the fire for the big zombie boom in the early 2000s. And the fact that George did which, of course, that commercial was Japanese. So we didn't get to see it here in the States. I remember vaguely seeing maybe like small parts of it in the commercials over here. But like the whole actual thing, I think, was only ever shown over in Japan. But it's fine. It's a fun little commercial. I'm sure George had a blast doing it. But yeah, I think you said you haven't read the screenplay.
I have not read it. No, I actually haven't.
It's been quite a few years since I read the Resident Evil screenplay. I do remember bits and pieces about it that I liked. I think I would have liked George's version better than what we got.
Yeah.
It's definitely more of a horror film as opposed to a sci-fi action, whatever the Resident Evil films became.
Paul W.S. Anderson,
yeah, and as a kid, like I was a huge Resident Evil fan. Like that was like that was my introduction to zombies. And that's what led me to seeing 90 for the first time. I was like, holy shit, they made a zombie movie? I got to watch this. But I remember playing that as a kid, and I was like, this is so cool. It's such an awesome concept. And I became so enamored with it. Once I discovered George and Dawn of the Dead and Night of the Living Dead and all that, to me, it was just like common sense. I was like, oh, eventually they're going to make this into a movie, and George Romero's got to direct it. He invented this shit,
Yeah.
And just the fact that he did, I forget how many different drafts of that screenplay he did, but he did a ton of drafts of that screenplay. Just trying in the studio again, like was just mentioned a second ago. I think the studio was just looked at as like, nah, George Romero, that's old news. Like there's a guy that I know that just directed this fucking Mortal Kombat movie. Holy shit, let's get him. And I think that's what the studio was looking for more so than a horror film, was just another money-making action video game adaptation, more so than an actual horror zombie film.
It's sick, man. It's so sick. We live in a world where there was a Mortal Kombat Annihilation directed by fucking John R. Leonetti, but George Romero couldn't get the job to do Resident Evil. Like, it's just sick. And like, again, I will say this. If there's anything at this time I'm actually okay with not happening, it's probably this, only because I don't know how much I would think Romero would say the type of Resident Evil movie that we would go on to get, and the franchise it spawned. There's a ton of them. I actually can't believe how many Resident Evil movies there are, like to the point where I don't think any of them are any fucking good. At least the ones that I've seen. I've
only ever seen the first one. I've never seen any of them past that.
I think I've seen maybe 4 of them, and I've yet to see anything I would consider very good, other than Mila Djokovic, maybe Ali Larter. But other than that, I just don't know about the movies. I don't know if I'm that disappointed here, but granted, out of curiosity, will love to have seen what George would bring. But at the same time, I don't know in a movie like a Resident Evil how much George's message would have been able to get over in a studio. Like, I don't know. Like, I'm guessing they would have been like, you want to do your message? We want zombies. We want action,
Yeah, I agree with you on that. I think that, and George was not a video game guy
No.
anyway. I mean, the story is that he would have, I think it was, he had his son play the video game and then give him notes on what the game was about so he could write the screenplay type of thing. So
yeah. It definitely, that seemed more out of his element than an Argento being in Pittsburgh to me. Like that's just completely different to me. But yeah, no, I don't know. Personally, definitely would like to someday read the screenplay. I should have definitely. Granted, I only have a week to prepare for these things. I love the George Romero Resident Evil commercial. I do too. PS1 Nightmare Creatures. Fuck that game. I loved the PS1. Need to check out this trailer, dude. Watch it. It's like a minute long. It's a lot of fun. I was so pumped for Romero to do Resident Evil at the time. There was a lot of talk about it, and just loved the original game as well. It would have been really cool. I wonder how faithful his script was to the source material. See, I don't think it would have been very faithful.
From what I remember, it was more faithful to the video game than the movie that we actually got was.
Wow.
Like it actually starts in a mansion, and it's like, and they eventually go down underground, and there's the characters are all there, Wesker and Barry, and it was very, because like I said, he pretty much had, I can't remember if it was his son or somebody else, but play the video game, give him notes, and say this is what happens in the game, and he kind of changes it up, puts his own spin on things. And
my guess with the whole where he says this was his best commercial period would be this period. I would think he got paid dumb money, because I always hear the story of Kevin Smith with the Superman Lives and how much money he got paid for a movie they never end up fucking making. I would think a lot of the fucking change he got was here. I definitely think he got paid handsomely at this time for doing these scripts. It's just such a shame. Could you imagine working that hard into something and getting paid that amount of money and nothing of it ever comes until you see Paul W.S. Anderson make the movie finally in 2000? I would be sick, and I'm sure George was. That's
what George was going through over and over at this time. So.
Yeah, and it really culminates to Bruiser, which that's why I really like Bruiser. We live in a world that had an MK series on TV that was hypersexualized and comedic. Well, yeah, we do. We live in a funny world, man. But let's move on into another project that he got fucked over in. And I don't know this whole story from beginning to end. Maybe you do. Romero, like Ben Grimm was saying, was in talks to direct the Brendan Fraser, Rachel Weisz Mummy movie in 1999, which goes on to be an astronomical hit, and a movie that people of my age, most people my age, maybe even a little bit older than me, always tell me how nostalgic they are for it. It's a big cult classic for people that were growing up at that time. Stephen Sommers ends up getting the job. The movie becomes a multi-million, $100 million movie. It becomes a trilogy. I don't know the whole story here. I know they wanted him. Is that correct? That whole, they didn't think the whole, George is old news. They actually wanted and selected Romero, the studio that made The Mummy, which for some reason is slipping my brain at the moment. And then
Universal.
He was Universal, and due to a prior commitment with another company, they fucked him out of the job. At least that's how I always understood the story. Do you know anything different of that, or?
That's pretty much what I've heard. I mean, it's always been pretty vague. George never really talked about it too much that I remember. He would always be like, yeah, I was in talks to almost made that Mummy movie, the Brendan Fraser Mummy movie, and it didn't work out. But so yeah, I honestly don't know too much about it. I've actually never even seen the Mummy.
Oh, wow.
Brendan Fraser. So yeah, I don't exactly know what happened here with that, but that was another one, kind of like what you were saying with Resident Evil. I don't know how well it would have translated to George's style. I don't know. To me, it would have felt like almost another, because I mean, George's version, I believe, was more of a straight. The version he wrote was more of a straight remake of the old Mummy movie from back in the day, more of a take on that, as opposed to what I guess it became more of like an action film, an action adventure movie or something. But so yeah, I don't know all the details on what happened with that, but yeah, it's another one that George got paid a shitload of money to write, and nothing came of it. Well, I mean, something came of it, but nothing for George, basically.
Yeah, I mean, nothing for George except the money. It's funny. It's like he was screwed creatively, but he was paid handsomely, which is, but it's bittersweet. That's so bittersweet. If you told me, I'm sure if you told George Romero in the 70s, okay, you get paid handsomely, but Dawn of the Dead's never going to come out. I'm sure he'd be like, fuck that. pay me nothing and let the movie come out, and I'm sure we're all glad that happened. It's a tale of two halves. It's like that time he was getting nothing and turning out classic with creative control, and this time he was getting paid bank and nothing was coming out aside from 3 movies, and 2 of the 3 that we've talked about so far were kind of like, okay, decent, but not the George we know and love. So it's kind of an interesting bittersweet era. And this movie, I definitely agree. I don't know if it would have spoke to his strength. I really don't. Yeah. But I do in another world, again, would like to see this movie. Superman Lives and Man of Steel are not good films. I would agree with that. When I met John Sayles, he talked about doing a draft of The Mummy whilst Joe Dante was attached to direct, and this was in the early 90s. Wow, so this goes all the way back to then, which is interesting. But it is nice to hear that Universal wanted George, and then eventually they do get him a few years later with Lang. Right. So that's nice that ended up happening. Yeah, Terrence used to play with a friend of the PS1. Those Mummy movies, always forget they exist. Who's the main? Okay, so that is the brief discussion on The Mummy. And then these next 3, I quite like all of them. And one of them I didn't even know existed until you told me about it. And I guess we could start with that one because the Misfits and the Bruiser thing kind of go together. In 1999, George Romero directed a sort of wrestling reality TV show pilot, if that's a good way to explain it. I don't even know how to.
That's referred to as Iron City, proof of concept. But
yes. Iron City Ass Kickers from 1999. And Alpha, I have to thank you for this because I never knew this existed until you told me this week, and I got to watch it. It's on YouTube, about 20 minutes long. It's on Alpha's channel if you're interested in Romero directing wrestling. Dude, tell me what you know about this because I am completely green other than what you've told me.
I mean, it's one of those it's kind of like The Amusement Park, which came out, a couple of years ago. It was one of those things that was just lost to time that George did and just kind of forgot about. Nobody ever heard of before. And then a couple of years after George passed away, the guy that plays the JB Destiny in the film kind of just came out of nowhere and was like, hey, we have, this VHS tape with this little short goof pilot that we shot with George in the late 90s. Is anybody interested? And kind of took on a little life of its own. It actually, here's the
nice
DVD. It came out, it's got the card on the back,
No way! That's awesome. Where did you get that DVD?
The JB Destiny had a table at the Living Dead Weekend a few years back, and he was selling these along with little posters and stuff. So I was like, amazing. I gotta grab that just for the collection. But it's the best way to describe it is the way I described it to you. It's George during a period where he couldn't get anything made. He's in limbo. It's just, and I think this is the project that George was just like, fuck it. I'm gonna go get a camcorder and I'm going back to Pittsburgh and we're gonna have fun. Let's just do something to have fun. And to me, it's hilarious because George is in the film for one. The opening shot of Pittsburgh, the overdub is George, and he's just like, yeah, you see all this shit on TV? Forget about it. I'm gonna watch some. What's the line? It's like, you never know what the fuck. And it goes to this wrestling federation in Pittsburgh called Iron City Ass Kickers, and Lori Cardille from Day of the Dead, she plays Luscious Lori, who's like the
story.
Yeah, the correspondent in the bar. George is playing a drunk wrestling fan in the bar who's like yelling and pounding the table for the, It's insane to watch because growing up, you just have this mental image of all these people, and here they are just having a blast, just fucking around just for the hell of it. And it's actually, I mean, if you're a wrestling fan, I mean, it's you got to see it. I mean, it's
if you're a wrestling fan or a Romero fan, must watch. Like yeah. I was, we were talking literally Monday. Hey, excited? Yeah, we're excited. He's like, oh, I put out the list of, okay, did I miss anything? He's like, yeah, Iron City Ass Kickers. I'm like, what? And he goes, yeah, it's amazing. And I'm like, yeah. And he sends it to me. I'm like, dude, I watched it on my lunch. I was mind blown. I was like, this is absolutely fucking incredible. Like, I cannot believe this. It's like literally a whole mini feud and they give the promo, and then there's the fucking match, and they, like you said, they do the Romero scene in the bar where Romero's like this obnoxious, like drunk Pittsburgh guy.
Yeah.
Like, I'm like, dude, this is absolutely incredible. Like, I thought it was a lot of fun. It reminded me a lot of like, like ECW, who were glowing at the time. Of course, not as extreme, but the way it looked, like it definitely looked like something ECW would, where Paul Heyman was there or something.
Yeah, it's like those old school hardcore TVs or from like the mid 90s that ECW would do. Yeah.
Yeah.
And Kyra Schoen from Night of the Living Dead, she's in the bar scene as well. She's the woman next to George. So, I mean, there's all kinds of like Romero alums that just came to play,
Yeah, and I thought it was really fun for what it was. Like, I was like, this is so like good for George, who's in an era where he couldn't do what he wanted to do or get what he wanted to make on the screen. He finally got to just do something for fun. This is totally, you could see it's a passion project. And like, I don't know why this got lost. I know you said it was like lost in time. This in the amusement park kind of got. I wish I'd known about this like when I was younger, like when I was into wrestling, into Romero. I would, if someone had he directed a wrestling. What? George Romero and wrestling? Like, it just sounds like a dream come true, and it really was. I was like, this is so. I don't know. I kind of really had a good time with it. I kind of was laughing with like. Just like this look on my face. I'm just like, wow, like this is absolutely something else. So if you haven't seen that, definitely check out Alpha's channel. He has the fucking entire thing. And it's quite something. Yeah. Terry saying, wow, I never knew that existed. I didn't until Monday, and we're doing the show now. So I thank Alpha for that. That was really, really something else, as George Romero directing some wrestling. But that also takes us to 1999 moving into 2000 with the Misfits music video that he directed for them. And of course, his only compensation, of course, he asked for was that they, of course, appear in his movie Bruiser, which comes direct to DVD in 2000. Might have had a couple of screenings, but I know it was mainly a direct to video film. I guess we'll briefly discuss the music video, and then we'll get into brief plot synopsis for Bruiser. I guess let me ask you, Misfits fan?
Hey, like I said earlier, I went through a punk rock phase in high school, so I had numerous Misfits shirts and numerous Misfits jackets. So, yeah, I've been a big Misfits fan.
Any favorite songs from them?
I honestly like the Danzig era. I enjoy that, but I kind of prefer the
Graves.
Later. Yeah, like
I like Graves better too.
I love his voice and just the overall sound of the music. Like, it feels more like. That's like, talking about the costume party in Bruiser where they're playing, like that's my dream Halloween party to go to, is that, right? The Misfits playing, everybody's all kinds of crazy shit going on. Like, so yeah, I've always been a pretty big Misfits fan.
Me too, man. I'm a big Misfits guy. And it's funny, my favorite song that they ever did ends up appearing in Romero's Bruiser is Descending Angel. I love that song. And I like Michael Graves' version of it better.
There's a great album. That Famous Monsters is one of my favorite of their albums.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think it's fantastic. And like I there's a version on YouTube where Graves sings it alone. It's just him and like a local it's the best version of that song ever. Like and every time I hear that, I think of Bruiser. Like the movie and that song are like connected forever to me. But I really like this music video before we get into the movie. I did the fun stuff in the hospital, and it just, again, it felt like Romero just said, fuck it, let's have fun with zombies here. And I really quite liked how mindless it was.
Yeah.
I don't know. I enjoyed it. Do you like the song Scream?
Oh yeah. Yeah. That's a great song. I really enjoyed the video as well. I also put that on my channel as well. Just, I don't know how many people knew that Romero directed a Misfits video, but yeah, I mean, like I said, I think this period was like George just saying, like, I'm tired of, this was George breaking free from, like, I'm tired of trying to please these fuckers in Hollywood and trying to get all this shit, man. Fuck it, I'm going to go make a Misfits video, or I'm going to go make this wrestling mockumentary thing, So I always appreciate that.
Yeah, instead of multi-million-dollar movies like The Mummy, instead he does a 20-minute wrestling short that looks like it was literally shot with a camcorder. Probably was shot with a
It was, yeah.
Yeah. And then fucking this, which I actually adore. I love the music video. And then, of course, culminating into this direct-to-video film, which we will talk about. Danzig, baby. All right, Danzig. I like Graves. I don't know why. I like Graves a lot. I'm kind of with you, man. And the same, I have a ton of Misfits. I'm a big, like, they're a top 10 band for me. I love them. Fiend Without a Face, Descending Angel, and Scream are such amazing Misfit songs in Bruiser. Dude, yeah. To me, that's so cool. I would probably do the same thing if I was George. Like, I don't need any money. I need you to be in my next movie, like in some way, shape, or form. And like, I love that they are. I think that's so cool of them. Which brings us to the last movie we'll be discussing here tonight.
Which, funny enough, before I forget, funny enough, you know the scene in Bruiser when the Misfits are playing and the two guys that get into the fight?
Yeah.
That's Big Papa Gator and JB Destiny from
Iron City Ass
Kickers. Yeah.
That's who those guys are. I didn't because I watched Bruiser before. I was oh my god! Now next time I watch, I'll be like, there it is. Like, where's Lori the story in here?
Yeah.
It's fucking amazing. But yeah, the movie we're finishing on here, this is the one we haven't talked about much. Behind the scenes, I'm very interested to hear your thoughts because I think of the 3 movies he directed in this 10-year period, it's my favorite of the 3. I know that's a big unpopular opinion, but I actually really quite like this movie. And it was the culmination to me of everything that was going on in his life at the time. This is from the year 2000. This is Bruiser. After years of being tread upon and cheated on, a man awakens to find his face has been replaced by a blank white mask. Yes, Bruiser. Now, question for you, I guess right off the bat, your initial thoughts of this movie. When did you see this? Where were you in life? And what did you think, man? I'm very curious to hear what you thought of this.
I love Bruiser.
Hell yeah, let's go.
This is like a common theme on my channel when I do streams. Like anytime I do like you mentioned earlier, the top 10 performances. To me, top 5 in my top 5 was
Jason Fleming.
No, not Jason Fleming. Peter Stormare as
okay.
He is, to me, he captivates. Anytime he's on the screen, I'm just like, this dude's all over the fucking place. He's like Al Pacino on cocaine in this movie. Like, this is, and I've heard people say like, oh, he's overacting or whatever, but I'm just like, I love his performance in this. Jason Fleming, though, is a fantastic performance in Bruiser as well. Tom Atkins playing a detective yet again. George started in the 90s with Tom Atkins as a detective. He ends with Tom Atkins as a detective. Yep. Donald Rubinstein doing the score. Of course, Rubinstein did the soundtrack for Martin, the score for Knight Riders. George brought him back to do the score for Bruiser. I just love, I don't know why. The first time I saw Bruiser, and I think it's the same reason a lot of people were kind of disappointed with Bruiser originally, is that didn't have a lot. There was not a lot of gore to it. It's not a very bloody movie at all. But you think Romero, you think gore. Especially when I was younger, I was like, oh, But other than that, I mean, the Misfits. I mean, there's just so much for me to like about it. It's not a perfect film, but I definitely think that it's definitely a film that desperately needs a Blu-ray or a 4K. Desperately, it needs a new release because I think it would benefit that movie so much because it already looks great. Like a lot of the the aesthetics of the building where the Bruiser magazine, like some of the lighting and stuff when Jason Fleming, there's so much that could be improved with a really good transfer. I think hopefully it's coming soon. I haven't heard anything for sure about it, but I think when
Vestron is like the front runner to bring it out, right?
That would make the most sense because I know Vestron does a lot of Lionsgate, and Lionsgate owns the rights to Bruiser, so that would be my guess is what they would do with it. So yeah, that's one that I think definitely needs a new release, and I think when it does get that release, I think people are going to kind of either discover it for the first time or kind of see it with new eyes and appreciate it for what it is. And I think it's a really good film.
I hope that happens. I really hope that happens because I agree with you. I've never gotten the bare bones DVD because I'm waiting on that Blu-ray. Like I know when it comes out, number one, it'll be affordable. Like I guarantee it'll be a $15 Blu-ray at most. Like I don't think it's a 20. It will be affordable. Vestron stuff usually is.
Yeah,
That's why
Vestron
I
usually
like
is.
Vestron. But I, for one, when I saw this movie, I saw it on like a generic like horror channel. I think it was called Fear Net, or it might have even been Chiller. I don't remember which one, but it was something like that. And the commercial for it was like George Romero, Bruiser, and I remember being like, "What?" I was really young at the time. I literally elementary school young. I don't remember where I was, but I remember being like, "Dude, I've got to watch this. Dawn of the Dead's my favorite fucking movie. Like, I can't wait." And I stayed up late to watch it, and I was like blown away by how different it was. And even then, I liked it. I don't think I liked it as much as I do now, but I liked it a lot. I was like, this is a very interesting, unique film, and it's unlike anything else he ever did. And guess coming full circle with all of the discussion we've had tonight and getting fucked out of one project after another, in turn, he makes this movie about Jason Fleming's character getting fucked over in life. His wife doesn't love him anymore. She's literally having sex with his boss. His boss demeans him. Everyone is stealing from him or cheating on him or screwing him over. And I think that parallels what George's life was at this time. Maybe not to that extreme, but in the world of Hollywood, yeah, it was happening that way. And he was really, I think, scuffled because, like you said, he was yesterday's news. He wasn't the same independent filmmaker that was making these movies in Pittsburgh. And he had now, of course, moved on to Canada and a new producer, Peter Grunwald. And I feel like this movie is just a big kind of loud Romero statement of being like, fuck all of you. Here's me at my fucking, creative best. And I love Bruiser too. I think Bruiser's fantastic from start to finish. And now I know people have made fun of the movie. Like they say that the mask looks silly. People also compare it a lot to American Psycho, which came out the same year. Like I've heard people say Bruiser is like the D-level version of American Psycho. I mean, I get the joke, but I don't see it that way at all. I think Bruiser has a lot to say.
Yeah.
What were you going to say?
There are definitely some elements that I can see even like American Psycho, like the opening scenes where he's getting dressed for work and all that. But I don't know the issues with the like people say. I've never heard anybody say like the mask looks goofy or anything. It just kind of is what it is, I don't know. I've always really liked it from the time I saw it. I don't know why, but
I think it's a good story. Like I think I like the way he sets everything up. Like, okay, you have the wife that just doesn't give a shit. You have the friend who I actually wish they could have given you a little bit more with the friend. Like I thought they had decent chemistry, but like also the whole thing of like daydream sequences of him getting pushed. And he's like, he imagines like strangling the lady that pushed him. Like, that's like everyone I know that has had fantasies like that, where just you're fucking fed up in life and work and the whole fucking charade that is life. And you just have that, like, imagine if I just pushed this lady over right now, because she's, not treating me the best. And he has these fantasies until they become realities. And I think in a lot of ways that, Face allows him to, let these fantasies become reality. And I don't know, man, I just think this is so much more back to feeling like what an original Romero movie would feel like. Like it doesn't feel like Poe, it doesn't feel like King or Dark Half or Two Evil Eyes or even Monkey Shines, even though I know Romero wrote that. This feels way more him in the era of like Martin and Knight Riders and Season of the Witch. I would throw this movie in with those, where it's like I watch it and I see that George Romero a little bit here, but again, a much older, more angry and frustrated version of that, young creative kid who was, up and coming in Pittsburgh, now in Canada. But again, I think the movie also tonally sometimes is a little bit weird. I think maybe if I had an issue with the movie, there's some scene like the very ending, it's like going for a laugh. I think that never fit for me.
I'm not a fan of the ending.
Yeah, it feels like somebody else did that, but I don't know. Maybe that was just a big laugh it's supposed to be, but I didn't laugh. I don't know.
Yeah, I was not a big fan of that little the coming, sir, and it's like, shoo, I don't know, doesn't work for me. But yeah, I mean that's definitely a really good point. It definitely is. If you think about it, it's probably the first 100% like Romero brainchild since Day of the Dead.
Yeah.
I mean, from Monkey Shines, that was based off of a book. Dark Half, of course. Two Evil Eyes was Poe, and I mean, everything that he had done up to that point was kind of a take on somebody else's stuff. And then I guess that's probably why I enjoy it as much as I do, is because you do see a lot of George in it. You feel George in it. I mean, there's a lot there. I mean, Christine Romero makes a cameo. George's kids are in the movie at the end, at the Halloween party or whatever. So yeah, it's definitely more of a George film than a lot of the stuff he had done earlier that decade. To me, is it perfect? No. I do agree tonally. There are certain moments in the film that don't work quite as well. Just because it's a little silly. I don't know.
Yeah, it is. It has spurts where I'm like, why? Like, just keep going. You're doing great.
But I mean, I think that would be like a constant thing throughout the rest of George's career. I think there are moments like in Diary of the Dead where, you know, it's just like, oh, that was going really well, and then it got a little silly. Or in Land of the Dead, oh, that was going a really good direction. Then George went and got a little silly, because I think at this point, I mean, we'd seen where George's head was at the time. He's making punk rock videos and wrestling proof of concept movies or whatever. Dude's just like, I'm having fun. Like, I'm ready to have fun. And Bruiser's probably the most serious film he made throughout the rest of his career. But there's still, like you said, moments. I mean, Peter Stormare's character, I mean, just some of the ad libs and the dialogue and that. I mean, it's hilarious. I mean, when he comes out of, when I guess he's the scene at the end of the film when he's having sex with a girl in the porta potty, and he comes out and he's like buttoning his pants up, and Fleming's character is just like, what's going on in there? You know, you're having a little fun. He's like, oh, what do you think I'm doing? Taking the shit of a lifetime over here? I quote Peter Stormare from that movie so much in my life. It's insane. The part where Tom Atkins is interviewing him, and he's like, so you were up there with the dame, huh? He's talking to him, and he's like, well, were there any witnesses? Anybody else around? He's like, of course, I always invite people when I have sex. Cheerleaders, Cracker Jacks. You know, it's like, I just love the dialogue, and there's so much of that was just ad-lib by Peter Stormare. I don't know. I think that's probably the biggest thing I love about Bruiser, is that performance alone.
Oh, he's great at it. He's absolutely, like, he chews the scenery and then some. It's fantastic. Now, I have heard stories where Romero and Christine were upset that they wanted to market this more as horror, although I kind of see it as a horror film. I know that they said it was more of a drama. I don't understand the upset. Like, I think it's a horror film. Like, I don't know. I never got that gripe. I don't know if that was just a story I heard or what. I don't know if there's any truth to that.
I mean, that's definitely, like, you can definitely see the mix. I don't know, the juxtaposition there, I guess, because there are moments. To me, I don't feel like it's a straight up horror film. Like, there's elements to it, but it's much more. I don't even know what to compare
dramatic
it to. Yeah, I mean, there's more dramatic scenes to it. It's more I don't even know how to describe it, but yeah, to me it's kind of like Martin. Like, to me, I don't think of Martin as a straight up horror scary film. You know, it's more of, like, I guess what, you know, people call elevated horror now. That's what I kind of see Martin as. It's more of like a thinking man's, like,
A24's Martin.
Yeah, exactly. Like, it's the original A24 film.
Shot in fucking Braddock, which I drove through, by the way. I was scared for my life in fucking Braddock. I was like, what the fuck?
Yeah, it's a little sketchy.
Yeah, a little bit.
Just a little. But yeah, I kind of think of Bruiser more in the terms of Martin, where to me Martin kind of works more as like a dark gothic coming of age film or something. Like, to me, that's kind of what I would kind of think of Bruiser as, more so than, you know, your Creep Show or any of his zombie stuff. You know,
I would agree. I think it's honestly, if you're going to watch anything he directed in this era, I would say watch it. I know it's underseen. Like, there's a lot of people that haven't seen fucking Bruiser. So yeah. I recommend it. Like, they're probably like, I probably like Night of the Living Dead 90 and Tales on the Dark Side, the movie. Like, I probably go back to those more. But if I was to recommend any of the movies or any of the topics, whatever we talked about tonight, it actually would be this. I actually really quite like Bruiser a lot. I don't know. I think it's kind of underrated, but let's go back to comments here. Don't forget to hit that like. Thank you so much. I adore Bruiser. Easily in my top 5 George Romero films. Wow, that's high praise right there. It's like a corporate neo-noir gothic horror mixed with satire and punk rock. That's a great way to describe it. It's amazing, and it feels like one big fever dream. It does feel like a fever dream. It really does. Pacino on coke dancing with a yellow bandana. Sure, yeah, that's basically. What do you think? I'm thinking of shit of a lifetime. The one scene where the girlfriend gets hanged is very similar to the opening kill in Suspiria. Yeah, I never thought of that, but yes, totally. Still not seen. There you go. Still not seen Bruiser. And Terry's a big Romero guy. Don't recall it coming out here. Oh, I don't know. I don't know how big of a release it had in the United Kingdom.
I don't think it had much of a release anywhere. There's literally 3 releases that I know of. Well, I think there's a Japanese release or something, but there's the VHS and the DVD here in the United States, and I know that Germany just put out a Blu-ray, or not just put out a Blu-ray, but it's been a few years. But those are the only releases of it that I can think of right off the top of my head.
Which is wild. And I know it dropped in Canada in 2000. Doesn't drop in the States till late 01. I think October of 01 they went direct to video here. So, I don't know. It was one that I had never heard of until I saw it on that, like I said, that bullshit channel. And I was like, a George Romero film I've never seen? I've got to watch this. Bruiser might be Romero's angriest film ever. I think it is. I think it's just like letting all of that out. I think it's letting a decade of frustration out in a film, and it works, man. Is there a legit Blu-ray for Bruiser in the States yet? No, there is not, unfortunately. I'm waiting on Vestron. I know there are certain people that work at Vestron that have hinted at it and said they're pushing for it, so I think it's going to happen. And when it does, I'll be fucking first day pre-order. Like, I will buy that shit. Like, I am very excited for that, because I would love to see feature. I would love to hear from anyone that was in it. Like, I would love to. I know Romero obviously not anymore, but I would love to hear from Jason Fleming if he'd be interviewed, or I think that would be interesting to see. Looks like just a DVD release. Yep, yeah, I figured that, but apparently that DVD isn't worth having. Yeah, I wouldn't. I would wait for the upgrade too. That's exactly in the ballpark I'm in. That's why.
Well, the cool thing about the DVD, I did bring up the DVD too. It does have a commentary track with Romero and Peter Grunwald on it, so you get George's thoughts on Bruce. I forget when this came out. 2001, I guess, is when the DVD came out. So.
Yeah, it is. That's when it dropped in the States. So, yeah, I've never heard that commentary because I've never owned it. So, definitely, I would assume Vestron will port that over, just to have something Romero-esque on the disc, and then it'll probably, hopefully, maybe get some new interviews. Aiden says definitely pre-ordering that Bruiser Vestron Blu-ray if it comes out. It will. I think it will. I think it's just a matter of time, honestly, and hopefully sooner than later, because it's a damn good movie, and it definitely deserves its moment in the sun, because it never really has gotten that. And that's why I'm kind of glad we could shine a little bit of a light on it on here. But yeah, man, that is Romero from we started sort of at 88, 89 all the way to the year 2000. Man, what a ride. What a crazy 10 years. I guess
it came full circle. He started kind of at the top where, 90 was a busy year for George. I mean, he was 90, Tales from the Dark Side of the Movie, Two Evil Eyes. I mean, he had a lot going on in 1990, and then he kind of went downhill, and mid-90s couldn't get anything made, and then by the end of the 90s, he was just like, fuck it, I'm just going to do what I want to do.
Yeah, and yet all this time was making more money than he ever did.
Right, yeah, and that's crazy. I mean, that's what you get with developmental deals and stuff, for a studio will pay you to write the screenplay, and they pay you to write it however many times they ask you to write it, and he did, 5 to 10 drafts of all those films he worked on in the 90s. Never got any of them made.
That is just absolutely unreal. And then really, I mean, that this is, there's not much more to tell. Like Romero, that it was the last 3 Dead movies of the Dead saga. And then I know he tried to get Deep Red remake made. He tried to get a couple of other projects made, but then he ultimately passes away. Not too shortly after I met him at the convention. I mean, he was a few years later. So, I mean, that was a sad day for all of us, but it's one of those things where it's like, it's very interesting to kind of take a look back at this particular period, because the 80s, even though, the early half was booming, it definitely seemed like towards the end it was slowing down, and to here where it takes a halt really towards the mid 90s. So I don't know. I appreciate, talking about this though with you, man. And there's nobody I'd rather, because at a Romero show, I mean, got to get Alpha Romero, the A and with Alpha Romero, man. So I appreciate you taking the time tonight. It was a lot of fun.
Thanks for having me, man.
Yeah, no. If you ever want to do this again, or come back on and talk about anything, if you have show topic ideas or whatever, feel free to throw them out. But do you have anything for your channel that you'd want to promote coming up or anything like that? I know you just did an auction, which I unfortunately couldn't be a part of. I wanted to get there, but I missed it. I was on I was actually on Psychobabble's 1 year stream. It was a lot of fun.
That's right. Man, honestly, stream wise, like I don't have it planned out like you. Like I literally go up to like I try to do one live stream at least every weekend. And I don't have any idea what the fuck I want to talk about or what I'm going to do until probably Friday night. And then I'm just like, something will come to me. Like I was like, oh, I could do Two Evil Eyes watch along or top 10, whatever. It's just whatever I'm in the mood to do. But yeah, I try to do a live stream every weekend. I'll drop some fairly underseen or underheard Romero content. So I just put an audio commentary for Argento's cut of Dawn of the Dead with Michael Gornick, Tom Dubinsky, and Lee Carr, who did the Making of Day of the Dead book, and he just did the Making of Creepshow 2 book, which just came out. There's a commentary that was on a French Dawn of the Dead Blu-ray release, 2017, I believe. I just put that up on my channel. I just like to me, I should just trying to almost archive a lot of this stuff, because a lot of this stuff is going to get lost to time, because a lot of this stuff is only available either overseas or on DVD, and people just kind of forget about it. I feel like people are more apt to revisit these things on YouTube more so than anything else. Excuse me, I'm starting to lose my voice. But yeah, other than that, it's at Alpha Romero 88. If you're a Romero fan, I mean that's all I talk about. That's all I do. And it's just kind of a passion project for me. I mean, just thinking about why I started a YouTube channel or wanted to start this anyways, to do things like this, is to kind of connect with like-minded fellow fans of Romero's. Like I said earlier, when you grow up in a small town in Western Kentucky, there's not really a lot of people you can have these conversations with.
Right.
And now I'm at this period of my life where I have a family and I have a full-time job, and I don't have a lot of time to go out and mingle and make friends and find people that want to talk about this. So I was like, fuck it, I'll just go on a channel and I'll just rant for 2 hours there once a week and just talk about anything that pops into my head about Romero. And if other people like it and want to hop on and join the conversation, that would be cool. So
feels great, doesn't it? Doesn't it feel great?
Yeah. It's like it's an outlet every week. It's just like when I'm done, I'm just like, I feel better. I feel good.
I'm the same way. I always say it's like Grande's Graveyard is my therapy. Like it's like, I don't care if I'm with someone, alone, with the chat, whatever. It's just you let it out and you feel like $1 million going into Friday. It's
absolutely.
But yeah, guys, absolutely subscribe to Alpha Romero. I could put the link. I didn't put the link in the description, but I can. I'll do that after the show. Please subscribe. He's a great guy, great content, and his channel's growing like crazy, man. He had just less than 100, I think, before we went to the Living Dead weekend. Now he's up over 200. So you're growing rapidly, and I'm hoping that a couple of people that haven't seen your channel here go directed to it, and we're excited for whatever you have in store next. I know I ain't been saying much, but awesome show and a awesome guest only on the Graveyard. I'd have to agree with that. He was a great guest, man. We had a great time. Let's see, another brilliant live stream. Alpha Romero, your channel is excellent. Great to see a whole channel dedicated to this great man. I completely agree with that, man. Mateo, give me one of these. Ciao, Mateo. Always good to see you and have you in the house. Good night, everyone in the chat. Best wishes to you all. Terry, I'll see you in Psychobabble on Saturday. Mernsey says, awesome show, fellas. Have a great weekend, everybody. Thank you so much, Mernsey. Hope all is well with you. Take care and be safe, everyone. Thank you so much, Sean Blue. Cheers to the weekend to you. Cheers, Miss C, once again. Wonderful show, and have a great weekend, everyone. You too, Aiden, and Texas THC 1965. Great stream. Thank you so much, Texas. I appreciate that. But to everybody, thank you so much for watching. I hope everyone has a safe, happy, healthy weekend, and we will catch you next time with Merzy's Movie Mansion as we dive into his top 5 David Lynch films only on the Graveyard. Too sweet peace, and good night, everybody.